I guess I'm on. Okay. First of all, I'd like to say thank you so much to Dr. Butts and to the Abyssinian family. I want to also take this opportunity to acknowledge my rock and my friend, my soulmate, my husband, Ellis Ray Leary, my daughter, Nicole Leary, and my granddaughter, Naya. I am honored to be here. I know on whose shoulders I stand, and I know who came before me in this very place. And so I am honored and humbled. I would like to do something I don't ordinarily get a chance to do in most of my arenas where I'm doing this talk. I'd like to say a prayer. And the reason, not that prayer needs a reason, but I think you should know the reason why I want to say a prayer. I think a lot of times when people get up behind mics and they get in front of people, they start thinking it's coming from them. And I'm very careful about making certain that I can get joy out of the way. And we all have an ego. We all have all that stuff going on. And I knew, especially after hearing the wonderful brother introduce me, that I needed to say a prayer so that I could be in the right attitude. So I'm going to say a prayer. Oh God, make me as a teacher in thy cause. Cause my mouth to utter the wisdom of thy ways. Make me wise, kind, good, and understanding. Give me the courage of thy martyrs, the patience of thy saints, and the knowledge of thy chosen ones. Make me as a fire that will burn through the darkness of man's ignorance, a flag that will fly above his weakness, and a song that will sing and echo through despair. And beloved Father, all I can return for these many gifts is a love so great, it threatens to tear me in two. I love thee from the innermost corners of my love. I beg for the priceless favor of being allowed to serve thee. All that my heart is crying and my words cannot express, I know thou, Heavenly Father, understandeth. I can say no more. You know, one of the things that, this is a subject that I don't often have an opportunity to talk about at length, especially to an audience like yourselves. And so it's going to be a journey of sorts through a lot of different areas. Some of them very thick in terms of literature. Others are gonna definitely touch different aspects of you and of me. But I'd like to begin by looking at the occasion, Dr. Martin Luther King, and understanding the journey I'm going through. And I'm going to go through a journey that begins with love, that moves through truth, that leads to justice, and ultimately to healing. One of the things that I think is very important about what Martin Luther King, his dream of love, tried to establish, and that love is such a powerful force. As a matter of fact, I believe it is love that causes the atoms in the universe. They don't know why they attract. The reason why they attract is because of love. It has both a physical property and power and a spiritual one. I think when we look at the notion of truth, truth is so fundamental to every aspect of who we are that I often begin every talk that I have with this statement, that I believe that truthfulness is the foundation of all human virtue. Without truthfulness, you cannot attain into any other virtue. You cannot grow as a human being, and you certainly cannot be healthy without truthfulness. Now, the issue arises when we don't understand what the truth is. When we begin to debate what the truth is, and I believe on a spiritual level that the truth is but one point. It is the ignorant that have multiplied it. And I think that when we look at truth and trying to unearth this thing, we have to know what happens. The brother talked about the fact that, you know, this is not a popular statement. And one of the things that kind of guides what I do and what I think should guide what we all do, and that is whether or not it's true or not is not the only issue. Because I believe that not everything that a man knoweth can be disclosed, nor everything that a man discloseth be timely, nor every timely utterance suited to the capacity of those who hear it. Martin Luther King had a message that was true. He had a message that was timely, but he had a message that was not suited to the capacity of the people who heard it. And because of that, he is not standing here today. I want to kind of begin with this whole notion of race, because I'm going to take you through kind of a purview about race. And it's going to get from very, very involved, broad, to right up close and personal. So at the end of this, there'll be an opportunity for questions and answers. But I want to talk about the issue of race and who it is that we think that we are as African American people, as people. One of the things that I started to wonder about in this country in particular is how come we seem to continue to have this problem about the issues of race? You know, and the truth of the matter is a big old giant elephant, been living with us, walking around a dinner table everywhere we work, big old elephant, and we've not dealt with that elephant. The reason why I know this is because of some of the things that I began to recognize that people do around issues of race that make it real clear that we have pathology around our issues of race. America has a pathology. Let me kind of give you a picture of what I mean by that. I had the opportunity, and I spoke earlier on Friday to a group, and I talked a little bit about my experience in Southern Africa. My sister has moved to Southern Africa, and I traveled there with 8 other African American women in 1994. When I arrived to South Africa, it was really fraught with a lot of difficulties and a lot of hostility. There was still blood on the streets in Johannesburg. So it was a pretty deep time. And one of the things that, you know, I explained to people was that, you know, if you're black and you go into Africa, there's a whole lot of stuff that happens to you. First of all, I'll tell everybody that when I got to Africa, it was the first time in my life that I felt completely normal being black. I met a sister that was in Botswana. And this sister in Botswana had done her studies in the United States. And she talked about her last year of medical school and how she sent for her daughter. She sent for her daughter to come be with her because she missed her because she had spent so much time with her studies. But she said, surely the last year I'll send for her and she can be with me. And within the first week that she was there, her daughter ran in from outside and said, Mommy, Mommy, crying. She goes, what's wrong, honey? She goes, Mommy, they call me black. They call me black, Mommy. And so this mother kind of looked and went, well, yeah, you are black. So tell me what the problem is. And it was at that moment, she said, that she realized what had happened to African Americans. And she got on the phone, and she called her mother, and she sent her home because she didn't want her to live a day thinking there was something wrong with living in this skin. And I said to this woman from Botswana, the only difference is I had nowhere to send my daughter. So what we have to understand is how we have begun to live in this skin. I tell people often that when I do a lot of talks, of course, at the university, and just so that you can kind of get a picture, Portland was touted as the whitest city in the United States. Okay, so I trained the Federal Bureau of Intelligence. Well, you know, it didn't work, but I trained the FBI and 750 Portland police officers. I trained them, and at that point, after I trained the 750 Portland police officers, I knew there was no one I couldn't train after that. I mean, after all, they had guns. Okay, so my experience in dealing with this issue and working with audiences is dealing with people who are in serious denial about even having a discussion about race. And so, consequently, when people walk in the door, and you have various people, and this represents a majority African-American, African audience, but there are people from different races that are here. So this audience is diverse. And what happens when I have an audience that is majority white, and it doesn't matter how many African Americans or even other people of color are there, you know, when I begin to raise the issue of race, immediately I have to deal with the fact that we have people entering the discussion at different levels. This is what happens on your jobs, it happens in your classrooms, it happens everywhere. And you have people, bless their hearts, I'm not mad at them, I want you to know that. I'm not mad at them, because there is something called Race Relations and Understanding 101, okay? And you know, you gotta go through 101 every now and then. You know, everybody, well, not all of us, but a lot of people have to go through 101 just to get to the 200 and the 300, 400 level courses. Now, the problem is, in a lot of my audiences, I have the 101 people, often the liberal, open-minded, white person that says, are there still racial problems, though? Haven't we really come a long way? And sitting to the left of that person is a black person saying, I want reparations. And my task becomes difficult because I got to keep everybody alive in that room. And the blessing is that, you know, I know that you, as people of color, as African American people, have entered this discussion at the 600 level. There is no need to enter any bastion of education. There's no need for you to read about it. You have lived in the skin which has afforded you a 600 level knowledge and understanding. And you have entered this room there. And so this is not a 101 course. I also understand that there, you know, undoubtedly people that, you know, no matter what you do, and they believe me, they come in all hues. Doesn't matter how many workshops, how much literature, how many, you know, educational programs that you get to them, they're never going to get it. I put these people in the category of those that have to die. Gotta go, gotta go, gotta go. No amount, nothing's going to help them. And I also respect their right to be here. I'm just not going to spend a lot of time with you. So, with that said, I want to move on and explain the difference in my experience in Southern Africa to start the preliminary discussion around race and how that race issue in America, and you know, a lot of people I meet from different countries do, you know, they'll say, you know, I don't understand what's wrong with you people in America. You know, you seem to have so many problems with race. You know, we don't have those problems in our country. And I say, of course not. Ain't nobody there but you. You know? But this is, America is a divine experiment, if you will. It is a divine experiment, and if this thing gets right here, it'll get right everywhere. So this is a divine experiment. I want you to know that, as tough as it is, it's something worthy for us to look at. And so as I began to look at my experience in Southern Africa, you know, I tell people often that, you know, first of all, my husband didn't want me to go, right? We had to deal with that because, you know, he takes and protects the family, and this didn't sound right for me to be going to South Africa. And once that was okay with him, I have to admit, you know, I'm from South Central, and I think that deserves an applause. And while, you know, I am Dr. Leary and Professor Leary at the university, I can become South Central. I will go there on occasion. So, I'm figuring I got to, have a little bit of a, just a little bit of a attitude when I get to South Africa. After all, all this new stuff, new president. So I had an attitude, had a little chip on the shoulder. I was ready for something to jump off. I was okay for that. So, and if you want to kind of get a picture of it, it's like when you've had a little run-in with somebody, say at work, on Friday. Maybe you all, just a little exchange in the copy room, just some words, a little flare-up. You know what I'm talking about, and it's Friday. You know how you prepare for Monday, right? You say, well, if they say this is what I'm going to say. And if they go there, oh, hey, So you're all prepared, you're geared up. You can't wait. You can't even sleep during the weekend. You're so geared up for Monday. So Monday happens, you get in the office, your heart is beating. They're walking up on you, you're all ready, and they go, you know, I'm really sorry about Friday. And you're thinking, I'm going to kick the cat at I got to do something with this. Well, this is what happened when I got to Southern Africa. When I got there, you know, I was, you know, had the chip ready. And after about a week or so and nothing happening, nothing at all, I started to provoke people. I said, you know, you can't go all the way to South Africa on the heels of Mandela and all that and not have an experience. So I was going to have myself an experience. So I would go up to white South Africans and I said, you know, tell me a little bit about apartheid, new president. That must be something, huh? And they go, yeah. As a matter of fact, you know, Joy, it's been awful. The oppression of the blacks, the behavior of the whites. Glad it's over, though. Welcome to the new South Africa. And after about a half dozen people did, I said, you know, I'm going to go to black South Africa. I'm going to ask the black South Africa. I'm going to have me an experience. So I go to black South. Tell me a little bit about, you know, apartheid, you know, Mandela. Tell me a little, that must be something. They said, yeah, Joy. Oppression of the blacks, behavior of the whites. Glad it's over, though. Welcome to the new South Africa. And I'm thinking, isn't anybody upset? Come on now. You know, we got our folks over in Idaho. That's close to where I live. You know, they act up over there. We got them. But I was in palaces. I was in villages. I was all over. 3 or 4 different countries in Southern Africa. And I did not feel the level of animosity that entire trip that measured the level I felt in the Portland airport. So as a social scientist, I have to ask myself, what is going on with this phenomenon? And what is going on is that Southern Africa, South Africa, the country of South Africa, owned it. They couldn't help but own it. They showed out and the whole world looked at them and said, shame on you, South Africa. And South Africa said, yeah, we did it. We're so sorry about it. Please come back and bring your money. America's pathology is her denial. It is what keeps us sick about this issue of race. It is our denial. Now, the denial is not just something, it's not a word, because I started to collect data. I have a tendency to do that. I wanted to look at what are the symptomologies. What's the symptomology of the denial? What does it look like? Let me give you some pictures of it. There are 2 groups of people in my experience. You know, I have one of my granddaughter out there. Small children tend to tell the truth. And old people tend to tell the truth. I want you to stay with me there, okay? Now, when people say to me, which is often couched in the form of a compliment, you know, Joy, I've grown and advanced so much as a human being. I've evolved clearly beyond you. I don't even notice race. And they'll say that right to you, like, lucky for you, you know? I don't even notice race. And I want to bring that into some context. Like I said, there are 2 groups of people, small children and old people, that will tell you the truth. Now, anybody that has a small child or, you know, family member, you're praying to God they don't get in a room like this before you do, aren't you? Because you know they're going to walk up on somebody and tell the truth. And you don't know what that truth is going to be. They might walk up to someone and go, God, you know, you got a booger in your nose. That's what you got. And then old people don't care what you think. They say, you know, your problem is you're stupid. That's your problem. Don't care what you think, that's it. Now, I want you to imagine, how many people know what a towhead is? I checked with white people on the term. Because a towhead. Now, let me give you an example. I didn't know what a towhead was. I was in South Central, and these 2 older white ladies were referring to this white child and said, oh, look at the towhead. And I'm thinking, them's fighting words. This getting ready to go down. Nobody got mad. I'm going, okay. And a towhead kid, now when I describe this child, you'll know what I'm talking about because you've seen them. And you almost probably remember the first time you've seen them. The whole kid is blonde. And it's that white, soft blonde everybody trying to get. But it's a phenomenal looking person. They like a wisp, but they're going to wisp away. And tow is also the term used for people who weave linens, and the small little fragments that fall to the floor is called the toe because it's white and it's soft. Okay, so you got that picture now, towhead. I want you to know there's a towhead. Imagine the towhead kid here, right, standing next to me. Next to the towhead child, we're going to put a Nigerian child. And next to that child, we're going to put a Japanese child. You think you're going to notice. Of course you're going to notice the difference. These are God's choice of colors. And to me, it's insulting, not only untrue, but insulting for you to say you don't notice race. I wake up every day black. I know it. I see myself, and you know what? It's absolutely okay for you to notice. It's not okay for you to erase me. The pathology associated with this statement is such that I'd rather erase you than acknowledge that you're there. And that's not okay. But it's also what we call cognitive dissonance. When people feel uncomfortable, it creates dissonance, and they do things to remove that dissonance. Here's another one. A person, I call this the fruit and festival approach, you know. People say, we want to celebrate diversity. We gave you all a month, that sort of thing. Okay. Great, great, great. What are we going to do then? Let's celebrate. Let's get a diversity committee. How about that? Get Maria. Isn't she Mexican? Yeah, get her. And they get mean. And let's get a little committee. And how about if we have a potluck? And let's have a theme. Let's have a cultural theme to that potluck. Let's have people bring cultural foods. And then, well, how about music? Let's have some cultural music, and maybe they can even dress up in cultural garb. And then everybody comes and checks off and leaves. And what you've now done is trivialize culture, have you not? You've said, well, this is all we built this country. Let's be clear. But what we're being told is, people of color, we bring you little festivals and stuff and your food and you can dance and all that. And then we'll move about the real culture. You see, so that's called the fruit and festival approach to dealing with issues of race. Again, trivializing it. The other one is the person that, and you'll hear about these people do this. These are people that go, well, I really don't care what color you are. You could be purple, green, or blue. Well, guess what? We're not. They can't even use the real colors. And this is all associated with the discomfort or cognitive dissonance, if you will, associated with just dealing with this issue of race. So what I'm going to do is get up close and personal with this issue of race. I want us to talk about it. I want us to look at it. I want us to question it. But I want you to know that we didn't get here by ourselves. This is an old problem, a very old problem. It's so old, in fact, that it reaches very close to where we are right now. I'm going to go to Numbers 12. In the Bible, Numbers 12. And Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married. For he had married an Ethiopian woman. And apparently they were a little upset about that. Well, it kindled the anger of the Lord. And the cloud departed from off the tabernacle, and behold, Miriam became leprous, white as snow. And it goes on to say that God smite Miriam with leprosy, sent her out from the people for 7 days, and said that if her father had but spit in her face, she had to be ashamed at least 7 days. And then the people didn't journey into a whole long thing because she didn't like Moses' black wife. Now, I'm 46 years old. I have a lot of friends that are Jewish, and we have discussed lots of things. But for some reason, we never discussed Moses' black wife. We could be related. Now, they did try to get at it with a cartoon recently. A couple years ago, they had a cartoon on Moses. And I was pretty impressed because his wife was brown. Moses himself was brown in the beginning. He became fully white by the end of the cartoon, however. But it was at least the first attempt to deal with the truth. So I want to say that the problem is old. It is an old one. And whenever you're trying to prove something to someone, especially if you're trying, my family, we talk all at once. We're pretty intense people. You got to kind of jump in there. And whenever you're trying to really prove your point, there's a couple things that you say when people aren't buying it. You say, well, I read it somewhere. And that means it's in a book, which means it must be the truth. Okay, now when you fail to produce the book, you up the ante. And you say, well, it's a scientific fact. What I'm talking about is scientific fact. Now, here's what we understand about science. Science changes its mind every 5 years. Takes back everything it said, never says it was wrong, says we've had a paradigm shift. Now, and I also have to remind people that just because it's in a book doesn't mean it's, because the criminally insane can also write. So now let's go to those areas that we so often turn to for our proof. Let's go to science. And these are things that are very important because this actually comes out of a book. Okay. How many of you are familiar with Carl von Linnaeus? Carl von Linnaeus. I want you to remember this date, 1707 to 1778. This is when he lived. Carl von Linnaeus developed a taxonomic system based on a criterion of skin color and laid the basis for 19th century racial classification. Linnaeus properly began the science of anthropology. So Linnaeus is to anthropology what Freud is to psychology, the father of psychology. Now, a lot of people don't like Freud, particularly women. And those who don't have the issue with the things he said about women, know that he was on cocaine most of the time. But you cannot deal with psychology unless you go through Freud. So the same is true of Linnaeus. Folks don't like Linnaeus too much, but you can't avoid him. Although color classification of races dated back to the ancient Egyptians, anthropologists referred to Linnaeus' taxonomy of 1735 as the first modern study of man. While Linnaeus advanced classification with his use of a color criterion, he also fixed on his four families of man certain moral and intellectual peculiarities that continued into the 19th century anthropological vocabulary. He described Homo Americanus. Who might that be? That would be the Native American or the Indian. Homo Americanus, he said they were reddish, choleric, obstinate, contented, and regulated by customs. Homo Europaeus, as white, fickle, sanguine, blue-eyed, gentle, and governed by laws. Homo Asiaticus, as sallow, grave, dignified, avaricious, and ruled by opinions. And Homo Afer, as black, phlegmatic, cunning, lazy, lustful, careless, and governed by caprice. These insights into what Linnaeus defined as racial character, personality, behavior, intelligence, language, and a host of other related categories were transmitted into subsequent attempts at a science of classification and became more fixed than the races themselves. Not a shred of science here. But it's in a book. But more importantly, of all the groups mentioned, there was only one that had the most scathing assessment, and that was Homo Afer. And now I'm going to tell you why that's so, because we know there's no science here. The reason why is because of that notion of cognitive dissonance. Now let me explain how that works. If I have a certain amount of information, knowledge, values, and beliefs that I hold true, and I am now faced with something in either my behavior or in my world that conflicts with that, it creates dissonance. Human beings work to remove dissonance. You cannot function with it. For example, if there is a child that I'm dealing with, and I've dealt with all of what they call the bad children, I want you to imagine a bad child. For 15 years, Johnny's been told he's bad. What does he believe that he is? He believes he's bad. And then the social worker types like myself show up and say to Johnny, "No, Johnny," because we've taken parent effectiveness training, "you're not bad. You're good." What does Johnny then do? He does something very bad. He breaks my windshield, cracks it, slashes my tires, and says, "There, I told you I'm bad." Now, see, I'm from South Central. I'm going to go with him on that. But if I'm a good social worker, I'm going to continue to say to Johnny that you are good until he maybe carves out a piece of himself that begins to believe good. But what happens when I tell Johnny he's good is it creates cognitive dissonance. And Johnny does something to remove the dissonance, to confirm for himself who he is. So understand, under any circumstances, human beings will work to remove the discomfort first. Now, I want to go back to that date, 1707 to 1778. What was going on in America? American chattel slavery. So now I have to ask you this question. Do you think slave owners, slave masters, men or women, do you think they went to church? You think they sang hymns? You think they probably assisted in raising the funds for the choir robes and such? You think? Of course they did. Of course they did. And that might have been on Sunday. But on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, they were raping their 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old slave girls. So by the time they got to the pews, they had to be sitting there with immunity. You see, they had to feel, certainly it's not my fault, because after all, did it not say scientifically that they're lustful? Then they deserved what they got, didn't they? It's not my fault, so I can sit there absolved in the pews, because human beings cannot function with dissonance. So what we understand about individuals like Linnaeus is he paved the way to ease the conscience of the white Christian world. And so when we begin to look at this, we need to understand it with another lens. So he also had a contemporary person that another person that he dealt with. His name was Johann Friedrich Blumenbach. Now, how many of you are familiar with the term or believe yourself to be Caucasian? It's okay. Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, he lived 1752 to 1840, designated 5 races or varieties of man in the second edition of his treatise on the natural variety of mankind. His division into Caucasian, Mongolian, American, Ethiopian, and Malayan races with the added Linnaean descriptive peculiarities became the subsequent basis of most 19th century anthropomedical studies. While Linnaeus founded his system based on skin color, Blumenbach considered a combination of color, hair, skull, and facial characteristics as fundamental means for classifying the 5 varieties of man. Central to his study was the Caucasian, a term which he originated. Now listen for the science. He took the name Caucasian from Mount Caucasus because its southern slope had cradled what he felt to be the most beautiful race of men, the Georgian. The Caucasus near Mount Ararat, upon which the biblical ark came to rest after the flood, seemed the appropriate source for the original race of man. Now I'm going to quote him. These are his words. For in the first place, the stock displays, as we have seen, the most beautiful form of the skull, from which is a mean and primeval type the others diverge, by most easy gradations on both sides to the 2 ultimate extremes, that is, on the one side the Mongolian and science. You got folks walking around talking about being Caucasian, Mongolian, all that sort of thing. Now I want to tell you something. I want to share something. I've never done this before, but I'm going to do it in this audience because I thought about it from the context of really experiencing a thing. And then I'm going to talk to you about the definitive, something a little bit more definitive. With the people in the audience that believe, now before you stand up, I want to tell you, make you clear about it, that believe that you are African American. I'm saying that. Now that means that you don't suffer any difficulty or ambiguity when you sign the little thing, ask what your race is. Okay, and that means and I'm not mad at you, let's be clear. If there are people here that have a parent that's of another race, and they get up there and they're resentful because they say, I'm not this, I'm this and this. I want only the people to stand and to have no ambiguity about being African American. I want you to stand up. Okay. If you consider yourself to be African American, okay. So, now, I want you to look around the room and you're going to find that people are of all hues. You got people with different facial features, different hair texture. Some of us got big butts, and some of us wish we had a big butt, flat butts, all of that, different body type. We got all that going on. Now, those of you that are standing there believe yourselves to be African American, if you know of somewhere in your family that there's some white blood, I'm not talking philosophically, you can find them. I want you to sit, please be seated. Those that know of certainty, a pretty significant amount of you. Okay, now, those African Americans that are still standing, now I always go to this group toward the end because everybody thinks they're Indian. Okay. The strangest thing about it is everybody got some Indian in them. I ain't mad at you, okay? I'm not mad. And the only people I know that can actually become, white people can become Indian. So they braid the hair, buy the turquoise, and they in. Because they've decided they're Indian. I'm talking talk to Indian people about that, but that's another training. Okay, so those of you in this, really that know that you have some Indian blood of the African American standing, you know you got some Indian blood, go on and be seated. Now, of those African Americans that are standing, if you know for a fact you have some Hispanic or Latino blood in you, if you have some Asian or Pacific Islander blood in you, would you please be seated? Okay, can we now give an applause for the 2 or 3 or 4 of y'all that are African American? Now, we also had Africans in the room that just, came from the continent, I'm talking about the African American. Now, my point here, now I got freckles, something been going on here, okay? Let's be clear. So by virtue almost of being African American, it basically infers that you have mixture. Okay, it's mixed, all mixed up in there. And now let's get back to the one-drop rule. Now, the problem is, here's the good news and bad news. All of you that are African American, those of you that got truly African American, those of you that realize you had other mixture, those of you that are biracial, what have you, in a racist society, you're all niggas. Thank you. Now, here comes the truth about race. And see, I do this as a preliminary because I've not begun the discussion, you see. Not really, because we have to get clear on a few things. We got to get clear. We aren't even clear about racism. So we got to get clear about stuff. And what we do understand, some of y'all thought, hair, skull, facial characteristics. Y'all went for that, some of you. I know you did. You're not going to admit it now, but I know you did. You thought, yeah, that makes sense. Now, I want to ask you, where do you find people geographically in the world, that have straight blonde hair? Where geographically? Specifically, Scandinavia. So in Scandinavia is where you find the folks with the straight blonde hair. We all know that. How do you explain Aboriginal children being born with straight blonde hair? How do you explain the subcutaneous fold in the eyes of the Bushmen of the Kalahari? How do you explain the broad lips of the Eskimo? You see, these things do not distinguish race. They do not. So let's read what DNA has told us now that we can look at it. Race is a concept of society that insists there is a genetic significance behind human variations in skin color that transcends outward appearance. However, race has no scientific merit outside of sociological classification. There are no significant genetic variations within the human species to justify the division of races. Mankind is one. That's the truth. That's what Martin knew. Martin knew intrinsically that mankind was one. And what we're going to talk about today is if, in fact, it is undeniable that we are one, that we are more alike than we are different. Matter of fact, there is more difference within a culture than outside of it. So, in fact, mankind is one. If we follow the one-drop rule in reverse, Martin Luther King would be Irish. And yet you laugh. But we bought the other one, didn't we? We bought it. Why did we buy it? We chuckle when we say if we use the one-drop rule that Martin would be Irish, but everybody gets to claim if they got a drop of black, do they not? So we got to get into the psychology of why that's so, which I think is greatly impacted by post-traumatic slave syndrome in terms of how we look at and identify ourselves, quote, racially, because it is a myth. It's not true. So now we've got to look at why then. Why then have we suffered so much around the proofs, the bell curve, Shockley, Jensen, phrenology, all of the things to prove a genetic inferiority? Aristotelian concepts of the natural slave, that you are de facto a slave by virtue of your skin color. You were born and intrinsically and inherently a slave, never to be on par with whites. What would prompt such a thing? This is what we have to understand in order to understand why we behave the way we do and what the nature of the injury is. So when I began to look, and I looked closely, I looked at the literature, and I looked at all the kinds of things that produce these notions socially in society. It's not a hard answer. It's not a hard answer because I believe everything in the dark is coming to the light. Everything is coming to the light. You know, Sally Hemings, we all knew, didn't we? Come on, how long we knew? We always knew about Sally Hemings. And then folks got all twisted and upset when they said, oh, Lord Jefferson fathered, oh, Lord, slave black, oh, no. One of the four found, oh, what we gonna do? You know, and then we had Strom Thurmond. It took 100 years to unravel that lie. But it was there, and I just want to know on record, anybody here know a white Washington? Do the math. Do the math. So this has never been a mystery to us. But there is fear. And the only way that love can triumph is in the absence of fear. Because you see, love cannot dwell in a heart possessed by fear. You got to cast that out because that's where faith lies. And so when we start looking at the fear that people have of the truth, because that's what we're talking about, the fear. And you know, the interesting thing about it is Martin talked a lot about truth, light, truth, knowledge, love. He talked about that. And what we have to understand is when he said that there was power in light, you know he meant that literally. Because if we were to turn all the lights out in this sanctuary, if it was dark in this sanctuary, we turned off all the lights, and there was one candle standing in the doorway, that light would flow in, the darkness would not flow out. Because darkness is an absence of light, you see. And when we start looking at the absence of truth is where we get the fear and we get the ignorance. And so the way we deal with that is you replace it with the truth. And you replace it with courage. And that's what we have to do as we journey through our own healing. So now I begin the discussion of post-traumatic slave syndrome. Well, let's first understand what trauma is. Now, I know you all heard about trauma, and particularly you heard about post-traumatic stress disorder after 9/11. Now, I'm going to submit to you that we knew what trauma was before 9/11. And what people will say, because, you know, I even had people on the radio show, because they say, yeah, but y'all free now. Why are you tripping? Get over it. You know what I'm saying? It's done. You're free. That's what people will tell you, right? And it's interesting, our response, because to me, that's an easy response. They say, you know, let's enjoy. I wasn't a slave owner. I didn't do it. I wasn't there. I'm tired of hearing about this. You know, I'm tired of feeling guilty about it. And what I say to those folks is, you know what? I wasn't there either. I'm not a slave, far as I know. None of my cousins, friends, and associates are slaves. However, we have to understand that approximately 300 years of protracted slavery guaranteed that the progeny of the South, the white progeny, would have wealth and prosperity and privilege. And it guaranteed that the descendants of those stolen away would have debt, servitude, fear, and misery. So it doesn't matter if either of us were there. That is what it produced today. Be clear. And then they say, but Joy, you know, I didn't do it. I marched in the civil rights movement. I said, so what you're saying is that you do not enjoy the rights and privileges of white people as this white person that, I mean, because when they come up and they tell you, you know, there's another couple out there that want this loan, but you know, they're black. I'm going to give it to you, okay? Just between you and me. You're going to say, no, no, no. I don't want that privilege. No, 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 no. I don't want oh, no, I know I could probably get a better deal, but don't give it to me. Do you enjoy that privilege? Do you not then also support and sustain the system? Because it's like you break my leg and get mad at me because I limp. So you yourself, but I didn't break your leg, Joy. I said, but did you support, sustain, vote in, and maintain the system that guaranteed your privilege, that created the pothole that I fell in that broke my leg? But y'all free. So let's look at trauma. What we understand about trauma, and there's a physiology of trauma. I'm not going to bother to get into that. But I'm going to talk a little bit about it so we can have a working knowledge of when people start talking about trauma, what they're speaking of. Now, trauma, you know, people always say to me, well, Joy, there were happy slaves. Yeah, well, go and find them. I said, but that's okay. I'm going to give that to you, because I'm sure there were some. We got some happy slaves now, don't we? So I know they had to be there. We got black overseers, don't we? Okay. And any of you want a point of reference, you know, look at that, the movie Sankofa. So you can understand the notion of the injury to the black overseer. But when I look at this whole idea of trauma, you have to understand that, in fact, everyone's not traumatized by traumatic events. When those buildings fell, there were folks that weren't there, that heard about it, that saw it on the other side of the country that were traumatized. They can't get on an airplane now because they were traumatized. There were folks that were close enough to smell the bodies. They were traumatized. There were people whose loved ones were in that building who were traumatized. And there are people who escaped it, saw it fall down, narrowly escaped it, and weren't traumatized. So everyone is not traumatized by trauma. Okay, we all have what is known as a differential response to trauma, the traumatic event. But what we have to understand is what it produces. So the first thing I did in my research is I wanted to find out who exactly gets this, the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. So this is a book called The Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Anybody know what that is? If you got insurance, you better figure out what that is. Because that's what they're trying to find a diagnosis to get paid. Okay. Let me tell you what this book said when they identified the groups of people that we accept. Victims of rape have post-traumatic stress disorder. War veterans, you know, Holocaust victims, and their descendants, as a matter of fact. We have heart attack victims, victims of natural disaster, victims of severe accidents. And I kind of looked for a while. I said, they don't have slaves in there anywhere. So when I spoke to my professors, which is the reason why I don't want you to know that I'm obsessed with education. I have 2 master's degrees because when I was going for my master's degree in clinical psych, actually I was going to get a PhD. And when I started asking questions around this, it got a little warm. So I knew I wasn't going to get a dissertation out of them. So I had to get up out of there because I started asking some questions about why slaves weren't there, and they started giving me answers like, well, that was too long ago. This is a diagnosis that requires a certain period of time, maybe a few years or, you know, some years, but that's just far too long ago for anyone. I said, okay, I'm with that. Well, let's read a little bit about what it looks like, this thing called post-traumatic stress disorder. How do people behave? Marked diminished interest or participation in significant activities, feelings of detachment or estrangement from others, restricted range of affect, meaning the person is unable to have loving feelings, sense of foreshortened future, does not expect to have a career, marriage, children, or a normal lifespan. Difficulty falling or staying asleep, irritability or outbursts of anger, difficulty concentrating, hypervigilance, meaning watchfulness, attentiveness, wariness, mindfulness, alertness, and vigilance, exaggerated startle response. Now let me explain something. In order to get a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, which by the way is treatable by medication, it generally works. You don't have to have all those symptoms. You only need a few of them to get the diagnosis, okay? Just a few of those, the kind of things that, the symptomology. So now what we're going to do is become diagnosticians. We're going to go back and considering the fact that there were some percentage of happy slaves, we're going to let you have that number. We're going to let you have that number. I want to now look at perhaps the injured slave. Now I want you to tell me, based on these conditions or these diagnostic features, whether you think a good percentage of the slaves might have had them. Not all of them, not the happy ones. Okay? Number one, a serious threat or harm to one's life or physical integrity. Do the slaves get that one? Okay. Threat or harm to one's children, spouse, or close relatives. Sudden destruction of one's home or community. Seeing another person injured, killed as a result of accident or physical violence. Learning about a serious threat to a close friend or relative kidnapped, tortured, or killed. Stressors experienced with intense fear, terror, and helplessness. Disorder is considered to be more serious and will last longer when the stressor is of human design. That's 7 out of 7. You think some of them might have had it. Now, what I want to ask you now, because this is an important question, because y'all are afraid. Okay? Do you think or remember any time when we got that free therapy after slavery? Do you ever remember when they said, line on up, we're going to do a group thing or something with you? Do you remember that? Didn't happen, right? And then, of course, the response is, yes, but you're free now. Now, I want you to remember I told you about the person with hypervigilance, exaggerated startle response, outbursts of anger, all that? That was Mama raising Johnny. Now, here's the question. Now, we're going to move from slavery into after slavery. But let's start looking at the nature of these traumas so we can get up close and personal. It gets a little gory here because I want you to know we got to tell the truth. And, you know, it amazes me how many people, when I start talking about what occurred during slavery, it amazes me how people want to leave out certain things. You notice how many, and I'm sure here in New York is a very special place, and this is a very special time. No, it is. New York is a city that is very, very powerful in its potential to change the world. Y'all need to get back with Harlem. Okay? We need... During slavery, what you experience, and the reason why I'm saying this is an interesting thing, because you notice how many children go missing and stuff like that? Or you know how many pedophiles show up all of a sudden? They the teacher, they the gym coach, they the all these folks. You know that's kind of happening a lot, right? And you know the Dahmers are showing up, Gacy, you know, cutting up the bodies, putting them under. You notice how all these folks kind of. You also know what they look like, right? Okay, but all right. Just stay with me. Stay with me. Can you imagine those people who know socially this is deviant behavior? It does not meet with the norm, right? This is something that is taboo. But you see, during slavery, you didn't have to worry about that upsetting the social order, now did you? You didn't have to be questioned on your moral conduct because you could buy your pathology. You could buy it at 2. And you could do what you wanted with it for as long as you wanted to, any time you wanted to, with absolute impunity. There was nothing to be done. You could buy what you wanted. And we don't want to think about that sick, maniacal person that bought it. But you know they did. You know they did. But we don't mention them. We talk about the happy master. They gave the happy slaves nice quarters and treated them kindly. That's what we talk about. And yet we see a pervasive number of those people that are doing that now. They did it then. But then some of you may say, well, I don't know. Is that written somewhere, Joy? So let's go to what is written. There are a couple of books, if you want. You know, some of people, it's interesting how we get hung up on things. You know, people have questioned the Willie Lynch story. I don't care. You can question it if you like. Maybe throw it out if you want. Get 100 Years of Lynching, the book, and you get the newspaper accounts. It makes Willie Lynch look silly. Okay? And if you want the pictorial, you know, Without Sanctuary. It's not table reading, but if you want to see it, it's there. Okay, so we don't have to worry about whether the people want to substantiate it, because you know that's the first thing they do, and they find someone that's black too, unsubstantiated, by the way. But let's look at what the law said. It is a book called Southern Slavery and the Law. And the one thing that's written about this is written by a man named, last name is Thomas, Southern Slavery and the Law. What's interesting about this is the opening chapter talks about the preoccupation with the black male penis size. You know, we keep talking about the myth and this and all that. Their whole first chapter devoted to the preoccupation with the male genitalia, which may explain why shortly after being lynched, they were castrated. But let's look at what the law says. And if any slave resists his master or owner or other person by his or her order correcting such slave, and shall be happen to be killed in such correction, it shall not be accounted felony. But the master, owner, and every other such person so giving correction shall be acquit of all punishment and accusation for the same, as if such accident had never happened. That's called the Casual Killing Act. That means if you happen to be beating your slave and you beat him to death, it couldn't be considered a felony. It was simply an accident while correcting the slave. And that sounds like painfully familiar to us around excessive use of force, right? And we start looking at the appropriate use of force and how many of us end up dead because that was the amount of force that they needed to correct. But let's look at this even closer. Why would you beat a slave to death? Well, you couldn't fine them because they had no money. You didn't want them to get jailed because then their labor is you. So you must beat them severely in order for them to submit. The slave, inherent in the process, was violence, you see. And they say, we're violent. But who pushed whom first? So let's look at another aspect. Those of you that understand that everything we do, we tend to pathologize. So how many of you are familiar with J. Marion Sims? J. Marion Sims. How many women in the audience know what a vaginal speculum is? Okay. So I bet you the brothers that we lost you on that. It's an instrument that is used to peer into the vagina. It was created by this J. Marion Sims. He is credited to this day as being the wealthiest physician to have ever lived, given that. So let's read about what he did. J. Marion Sims was a physician in the mid-1800s who was credited with the creation of the first vaginal speculum, which was made from a pewter spoon. Sims had built a makeshift hospital in his backyard where he conducted surgical experiments on African slave women. Sims reasoned that slave women were able to bear great pain because their race made them more durable, and thus they were well suited for painful medical experimentation. Because you know, Thomas, we felt less pain, we didn't need sleep, and we didn't feel grief. That's really convenient, isn't it? So now we understand, well, how did they get these women? Where did these women come from that Sims got? So now let's go back and take a, well, they were to Sims, and the people would complain. Each one of these slave masters would bring these women in, and they'd say, this young woman here is not fit for duty. And Sims would look at these women, and indeed they from something called a vaginal fistula. You might have heard about this. Oprah talked about it. The woman on there was talking about a vaginal fistula. And a vaginal fistula often occurs during childbearing when a woman will tear so deeply that it will tear through the urinary tract and the bladder. In fact, you will see feces and urine that will drip through uncontrollably. It does heal, but it smells and it's very uncomfortable, and it's really a horrible state, largely due to the smelliness of it. But if you are, in fact, one of those women that have a vaginal fistula, can you still work the fields? You can work the fields. You'll be smelly. It may be uncomfortable, but you can work the fields. Can you sweep and clean in the house? Can you feed the animals? Well, then what makes her, J. Marion Sims, unfit for duty? I need to have sexual access. So you need to fit so that I can do her, because that is her duty to me. Okay, so this is why they came to J. Marion Sims, and let's take a look at why they thought this was all okay. And it has to do with pathologizing race. You see, because by pathologizing, making race a sick thing, then you therefore justify your behavior to remove the cognitive. Yes, you're listening. That's right. You got to remove that dissonance. So now, their first pathological symptom was their primary racial characteristic, their skin color. In a medical world that categorized life as either normal, which is dichotomous thinking, people of the African diaspora were continually condemned to the category of pathological, their abnormal skin color serving as a foil for normal white skin. Pathological causes for this condition were concocted in order to explain its prevalence. But how come there's so many of these black people if it's a pathological thing? Here is what the favorite theory that arose out of the scientific medical journals. These people, the skin color and attendant physiognomy of the black, are the result of congenital leprosy. They decided that's what's wrong. If you're black out there, you got congenital leprosy. That's why you're black. Such medical arguments in collusion with racist and stereotypic scientific and cultural explanations grounds for differential treatment. Now, second pathological symptom. The second symptom was gender. Black females who were perceived to be irreligious, lustful, and immoderate. Well, my God, that is really convenient. Here is the proof. They're putting buttocks and genitals were offered as physical evidence of their pathology. Anybody with a big butt? Then it gets a little deeper. This one where I just really had to, I couldn't believe this one. And some people have heard about this particular symptom. Samuel Cartwright argued, this was a 19th century physician, that two particular forms of mental illness caused by disorders were prevalent among slaves. One was drapetomania, which was diagnosable by one single symptom: the uncontrollable urge to escape from slavery. They pathologized not wanting to be a slave. Pathologizing. Then there was a second one, dysesthesia aethiopica, which was any symptoms: destroying property on the plantation, being disobedient, and talking. What I'm saying here is that you have to pathologize. Journals have been written about this, all to justify the behavior of what they did to remove the dissonance. So more seriously, when we look at the nature of the injury, y'all are all free. But I want you to take a look at what happened and what I mean by transgenerational impact. Transgenerational, among a continuum, generational trauma. If you are a slave mother and you are going to prepare your children for adulthood, yes? Yes. There had been something called rites of passage, which is movement from your childhood into adult, meaningful work in support of the clan. Rites of passage. We have now adopted the term adolescence, which is a new term, by the way. It was developed in Europe, which now gives young people permission to lose their minds. We just say, oh yeah, they're adolescent. Not in my house. I guess they just didn't get to be adolescent in my house. We did then began to give them permission to be insane during that period. But before that, we had rites of passage. And if I'm a slave mother and I'm a good mother, I am going to prepare my daughter to be raped. Come on now, I'm not going to let my little girl walk into that mind, am I? Not as a good mother. I wouldn't do that to her, so I'm going to say, baby, and I'm not going to wait till she's 18, assuming it's going to start. I got to pull her out at 8, 9, and 10 and say, baby, here is what happened to you. Here is what may or may not do to you, and this is what you might want to make it hurt less, and baby, don't scream. They make it worse for you. And baby, they come, and I don't know if it's one or two or a group of them, and I don't know how many times, but surely they're, baby, this is what they will do. If I'm a good mother, I will prepare my daughter for pathology. And when that night comes to wrestle her away, her father stands next to me, helpless, as she begs him to help her. But y'all are free. And what we have to understand is the nature of that injury. What it did to emulate the father, prepare her daughter for something she could not humanly think was for her. And then she had her own traumas. And remember, mama hypervigilant. And daddy has got outbursts of violence because he never got a chance to heal from his injuries. So then they said, but y'all were free. So now the second question is, after American chattel slavery officially ended, trauma stopped. So not only you're not getting healing from the original trauma, the traumas continued. Yes, I don't want to make it up. Am I telling the truth? Okay, well, let me go back to history in case folks, do you know who Emmett Till was? Was that during slavery? It was not, but let's go back and look at what happened directly after slavery, because directly after slavery officially ended, meaning someone crossed the T and dotted the I, do you think they stopped enslaving us? No. So you had something called peonage. You can do the research. Peonage means the unlawful selling of slaves back into slavery. So there was a fair number that said, I don't care what you say, I'm going to keep my slaves. And then when they got broken down and caught, they moved to the next level. They said, well, you know, we can't re-enslave. You know, but we're going to develop some codes. We're going to make it so there is nowhere for them to go. So that means that if you enter this city and unless you work for a white person and they've signed off, you better not be here. You have no place to be unless someone white is being taken care of by you. And then they said, well, we can't do that anymore. Lord, can we? So that's when we created something called convict lease. If you want to know where the original overration of black people in the criminal justice system began, it began with the convict lease laws. So now they're saying, well, can't we lease them? Well, in order to lease them, they got to be in jail, don't they? So now we figure out how to get them in mass in jail. Did you look at a white woman? No, get 100 years of lynching so you can understand the kinds of things they were arrested for. So now we have all of these chain gangs, and 25% of them died while under convict lease because there was no protection for them. But y'all are free. And then we had the civil rights movement, right? And prior to that, you know, when we start to get the whole notion of how to live, you had sharecropping, right? But they didn't really share, did they? So when we start looking at that, it's basically indentured servitude, only worse. And then we said, well, separate but equal. And truth be told, during separate but equal, you know, that's when, you know, the Klan arose and Reconstruction, all those things began to happen. You look at that whole notion of what happened to us, the promise of freedom. And during segregation, actually, we were doing quite well. You know why? Because we had to depend on one another. We had to get beyond the lack of trust we had because we were all we had. And so, anchor I went to. And you were the school I brought my children to. And you were the hairdresser. That's who you were for me. You were my community. You were my tribe. We economically blossomed. Tulsa, Black Wall Street. And what they did was they leveled us. And I know that people had a ribbon on because they said the worst disaster on American soil, the act of violence, was the Oklahoma 171 people. We had a moment of silence for them. Who tied a ribbon on for the 300 that died in Tulsa? How come we didn't know that? They didn't count as human, or they were trying to run from the dissonance. So what we have to understand is, how long then have we been free? 38, 39 years? But y'all are free. You see, yeah, but Joy, that was a long time ago. Surely you don't think that we now possess the behaviors or any... Well, let's take a look at that. And I'll share with you some of those behaviors, because, you know, it's called adaptation. It's learning to adapt to living in a hostile environment. We have normalized, we in this room have normalized our injury to such a degree that, and of course, white people have a disincentive for us to look, because then they got a mirror. And so let's take a look at what it might look like up close and personal with you and I. Because, you know, we learn from the generation that precedes us. One of the things that I learned to do is I learned to cook at my mother's side. You know how we were talking about that the other night. We had the the blessing of being in the home of Brenda Ross and her husband John, and they cooked a real meal. They laid it out for us, and she was talking about how she made those apple dumplings, and her daughter goes, "Well, did you write the recipe down?" She said, "Ain't no recipe." You know, and knows, you know, because you learn that way. Well, my mother would, you know, go out, and I would learn to cook. My mother, you know, I'd go out and I'd go grocery shopping, you know, and I noticed that whenever my mother came to the point where she was going to buy tomatoes, she'd only buy 4. I don't know, just 4 tomatoes. To this day, I can't get a 5th one in the bag. Can't do it. I've tried, can't do it. You just simply don't need more than 4. My husband, I said, you know, Ray, could you go still get some tomatoes? He came back, a whole bag of tomatoes. I go, that's a whole lot of tomatoes you brought back. He said, well, didn't you say we needed tomatoes? I said, yeah, but we don't need that many. He said, well, how many we need? I said, about 4. We need about 4? Now, that's innocuous. That's not going to hurt anybody whether I buy, you know, 4 tomatoes or not. But there are other things that we've adapted to they're not innocuous. When we began, I had a woman say to me, and it really crushed me. Actually, it was a young man that talked about his mother. And it was a camp, a basketball camp, and I was working with black male athletes. I was talking about responsibility, relationship, and sexuality. And when I was talking to this one young brother, he said to me, and let me just kind of describe him. This brother is coal black, smooth, blemish-free, hope to die, drop dead. Beautiful brother. And he said to me, well, you know, my mama told me, don't you ever bring home nothing black as you. That's what she had said to him. And when he looked at me and saw the horror in my eyes, he said, oh, but I could bring home someone like you. And I said, brother, you've not complimented me there, but I can imagine his hurt from his mother who looked like him and what he reminded her of. So I began to look at that, and I started to look at the behaviors that were exhibited by African Americans that are part of what I call post-traumatic slave syndrome, and that's one of them. Of course, our skin color and hair texture and that foolishness which is coming out in the hip-hop rap, so it ain't gone nowhere. Okay, so let's be clear, we are sticking with that. Hence the term natural. I had people say to me, you're going natural, huh? As if I was doing something odd. I actually had a white person respond to that. And well, my wife goes through the same thing. You know, she wears her gray. I go, he don't get it. And I'm not talking about wearing your gray. I'm talking about wearing your hair, stay with me, the way it grow out your hair. We have now created a whole new industry on how to care for the hair that grow out your head. Because we don't know how to do it anymore. Now, don't get me wrong, because I think black people are some of the most versatile and beautiful. Well, we can dye it, shave it, lock it, perm it, braid it, roll it, do whatever we want with it. I ain't mad at you. But please don't have a problem with how it grow out your head. And evidence of that is the natural hair products that are coming. Oh, and you know, white people are selling it to us. About to figure out how they can now market, because they marketed how you couldn't deal with the way the hair grew out your head. And that to you, and now they're selling to you how to take care of your hair that grows out your head. And then we look at each other as though we're making a statement because we wear our hair the way it grows our heads. There's something wrong with that. That's post-traumatic slave syndrome. Okay, so now let's move to something a little more intense and more serious. When I was in Southern Africa, what I marveled at was the children. I marveled because these children were so tall. Dirt poor, tall, taller than anybody in America I had met, because they were clear about who they were. They were clear. They may not be clear about some other things, but they were clear about being black and being all right with that. And I could see it. I could feel it with them. And one of the things that I noticed that happened to me is when I got to South Africa, I cried. I wept constantly. I would weep because I was so moved by what I had lost, I thought. Now, in Southern Africa, you know, in different parts of Africa, like you have people who dance and sing. Folks sing in Southern Africa. And they really sing. And sing when you cry. Like when you cry, nobody goes and runs and gets a tissue. They just silent, 4-part harmony. They start singing, right? And this was so, I mean, it was overwhelming. I was there, like, again, with 8 other African-American women, and we were overjoyed at this melodious response to my tears until they would all stop and then turn to us and say, all songs to us. Now, contrary to popular opinion, we can't all sing. And y'all know that because y'all got the Apollo. And we know what we do with folks that can't sing. Okay? So the women would look over at me because they wasn't interested in singing. Now, we did end up with some pretty nice, luckily there were a few women that could sing, and we ended up on the radio, if you want to know the truth. We really got into singing. But got a little upset with me. And so they met me when we were on our way to Lesotho. And they got on and they met without me, and when I woke up, they said, Joy, we've met, and we've talked, and you know, as you know, today we are going to Lesotho. And Joy, we're not singing when we get to Lesotho. So whatever to do with yourself, to get yourself together so that you don't cry, you need to do that, okay? Because we are not singing in Lesotho. Okay. So I said, I'm good. I can handle this, you know, I'm good. So we get to Lesotho, and they have invited people from all over, people from the villages. You have political figures, you have educators, you have all these important people, and you have village people, different languages, they all show up. And in Africa, you know how we are about greeting. Now, black greeting. You know, hey, how you doing? Hey, listen. Why did when you're with white people, they go, gosh, you know so many people. I don't know them people, but I'm going to greet them. Because y'all know what happens when you don't greet, right? Try to walk past Aunt Dolores and not greet her. Try to do that and live. Okay? I don't care if you got to run to the... Did you see Aunt Dolores? Have you lost... Or then don't try to not notice folks. Oh, you too good? So we are serious. In Africa, they put a hold on greeting. They're ceremonial to greet. And there's no such thing as sneaking in the back. Everybody is greeted no matter how or when. The meeting is over when nobody's late. Okay? So what happens is, you know, I get up, and each one of us, you know, my crew has already told me we're not singing. So each one of us gets up, and we introduce ourselves. And as we introduce ourselves, the translator gets up. And this is interesting. His name is Gilbert. And Gilbert is the descendant of slaves that were enslaved in South Africa by the Dutch. So we have a similar experience, only he went back and learned all the tribal languages. He didn't just speak Afrikaans. So Gilbert gets up, and he starts, and I say, hello, my name is Joy. I'm traveling with a group of women and African-American women, and we are trying to develop a corridor with African women, and I just kind of sit on down. Gilbert says, thank you. He gets up, and he starts to translate. And then he goes on and on and on. And so my sister, who's in the group, and my niece, they're looking over at me like, I said, I know I didn't say all that, right? And he's going on, and after a while, the people are chanting. And then, you know, so I'm like, okay, Gilbert, what'd you tell him, Gilbert? What'd you tell him? Hey, Gilbert, that's all that. I said, Gilbert, I know how to say all that. He says, oh, okay. Well, here's what happened. I was telling them, you know, everything you said. And then when I said African American to some of the village people, when I said that, they got confused, the folks, because they thought all Americans were white. So then I had to explain to them that you were the descendants of the ones that were stolen away. And they started to say, welcome home. Everybody was singing. Everybody. I was tore up. Tore up. Everybody singing in the room. My sister's glaring at me like... So this woman is standing over in the corner. She looks over at me. You know, she walks over, because you know everybody's singing. And I'm sitting there trying to suck it all back. And she grabs me by the hand and she said, did you think we would forget you? She says, I am from Lesotho. Lesotho is my home. If I leave Lesotho for 10 years, Lesotho is still my home. If I leave Lesotho for 50 years, Lesotho is still my home. She says, you are African 300 years from home. She said, you know, we're so proud of you. Don't you know we mourned Martin with you? We mourned Malcolm with you. We just wondered coming back. I was tore up. an experience in Southern Africa, an awakening, a pilgrim. And one of the things that I realized is how injured I was. Truly, my own injury. And the first thing I always do is look at the mirror. You know, trust me, a lot of this diagnosis I could tell by me and my family body cells. But one of the things that I started to realize was people's judgment of us. And let me help you understand. I'm not one of those people that think Africa is nirvana, because that's not true. Africa is not nirvana. Africa needs us because Africa's problems are severe. HIV and AIDS in sub-Saharan Africa is destroying Africa. What is going on in Sierra Leone is unmentionable, what they are doing to children. And the rapes in South Africa are horrific. Let's be clear, Africa is not nirvana. But one of the things that I did recognize was how much they could embrace. And they would say things, you know, in all these different languages, but all of it translated to a similar statement, and that it would translate into, upon greeting me, was, I see you. I see you. That's going to be very important as I talk about my research. But I was touched by that notion of I see you, acknowledging that you are important enough for me to connect with you. And even Einstein said that the myth of humanity is our perceived disconnection. We are living the lie of disconnection when we are connected. And what happened when I got is I was a bit depressed. I came back home to being marginalized and invisible. I came back home to a familiar hostility. And so I stayed in my home a bit, to such a degree that the women that traveled with me would call my sister and say, has she left the house yet? And I had not. So finally one day I had this experience which forces me out of my home. My young daughter runs in and she says, there's a boy outside. He says he's going to beat up Nadine. That's her brother and my son. And he says he's going to pee on the car too. This could happen in the hood. So I had to go outside. So I go outside and they're standing in the middle of everything is, you know, these young brothers that are just kind of steady, looking tough. Nobody's over 10 years old. So I walk over to the ringleader and I say to him, excuse me, brother, has my son done something that I need to know about? He said, yeah, I want to know if you got some kind of eyeball problem. I said, what did you say? I said, I know he bionics, I don't know what he said. I said, what did you say? He said, I want to know if he got an eyeball problem. What he staring at? I said, wait a minute. I mean, you want to beat my son up and pee on a car because he was looking at you? Because my son was at you, you want to beat him into the ground? He could have been looking at you because he's got a little hoop outside. You know, we had a little basketball hoop. Maybe you want to play one-on-one. He could have been looking at you because maybe you want to go in and play some little video games. He got a little Nintendo in there. Maybe he could have been looking at you because down the street is a park and y'all could go down the park and kick it. He could you for anything. Oh. I got a little therapy there. You know, but I'm giving them, you know, the same lecture most of you give them. Listen, we got to live in this community. We got to live as a village. We can't hurt each other. We got to protect each other. The whole thing. And then it occurs to me when I go back inside, as I'm formulating what I'm going to look at. What is the research, Joy, that you want to look at? As I'm formulating that, I recognize one of the symptoms of post-traumatic slave syndrome. I recognize something called vacant esteem. Vacant. I look at that because I remember being in the villages with the floor and the tattered clothes, and I remember, I see. And then I started to look at what happened when I got back to America. Because when I got back to America, African Americans were saying, what you looking at? What you looking at? I see you. What you looking at? Isn't that an interest? What had happened to this little 10-year-old boy that he could not withstand a gaze? What had happened in those fragile little group of years between birth and 10 that he would have so much rage about a glance? And then I began to realize what boy was so angry about. He wasn't angry at white people, you see. He was angry with my son. But why was he so angry with my son who looked at him? Because there's something we all know in this room. It's something that black people can do. We know our grandmothers and our great-grandmothers and our mothers and our fathers. We all somehow, another one of those things we normalize, which is supernatural in some ways. We can read people, can we not? We can read you. Not only can we read you, we can walk into a situation and go, whoa, it's feeling thick in here. My sister and I can walk into a supermarket and watch a situation and go, now you checked her out, right? Yeah, you know, she came in, you see that man, you see that woman he with, you know that's his wife over there, right? Okay. You know, getting ready to get real up in there. Meanwhile, there's a white woman standing behind me going, did you see someone come in? There's a reason for that. I'll tell you the reason for that, because privilege allows her or him to not have to concern themselves with what's going on. That's not so with you and I. So I'm looking at this notion of what you're looking at. And I know, you know, we represent a lot of different understandings, but I remember reading in some religious scripture something saying about black people. And in this statement it says, the black man is like the pupil of the eye, surrounded by a sea of white, but it is the pupil which is the sight. It beholds what is before it. So what that little boy could reflected back at him is what he hated about himself. Because you see, we have our sense of esteem based on the significant appraisal of those closest to us. Because I am not who I think I am. And I am not who you think I am. I am who I think you think that I am. So that little boy thought that my son thought of him as me, and he hated him for it. He hated him so much that he wanted to hurt him. He wanted to hurt him for revealing back to him what he hated most in himself. He didn't look at white people because they reflected back, but we do. That's why I don't like you. That's why I hate you, because you remind me of the nothing I am. That's why. And he's 10 years old. And it doesn't start at 10, it starts at 3. But this is part of what I call post-traumatic slave syndrome. Let's go up a little closer. Let's look at what we do. And it's very common. And it doesn't matter what class, doesn't matter what age, what education, it doesn't matter. You have white Johnny, black Johnny. You have a white mother, you have a black mother. They both have children. Both these children are in Little League. Both these children went to the same classes, the same schools, and played together. Earned the same marks in school. And so the black mother says to the white mother, commenting on her Johnny, you know your Johnny. That boy is really doing quite well. And she says, yes, he is. Matter of fact, he's quite the man. He is in the talented and gifted program, and as you know, he's doing quite well in Little League. He's also in the science fair, and his project got #1. Now, his uncle is an astronaut, and I really believe the boy has a propensity. You got to cut her off. She is oozing with enthusiasm, and I'm not mad at her. She's proud of her Johnny. And then she, remembering, oh my goodness, what am I saying? This Johnny, knowing that this child has the same or even maybe greater qualities, and she says to the black mother, yes, but your Johnny, that boy is really coming along. And before she can finish, she goes, girl, shut up. You should have seen his little butt yesterday. I tried to kill him. Oh, he's a mess. Oh, girl, shut up. You do it a lot. But here's the bottom. She's proud, don't we? Even though she goes, girl, shut up. She's really proud, though, isn't she? And we all know it, don't we? But she can't, it almost is painful to hear the compliment. This is 4. Are you with me? Yeah. It's 2 4. And what we have to understand is Johnny is standing next to her. But let's roll it back so we can understand it in context. Let's roll back that little scenario, but let's roll it back to slavery. And now you have a slave mother. She's got 3 or 4 children. And the slave master walks through, male or female, doesn't matter. And they come by and they go, my, I see that Johnny of yours. Well, now he's really coming along. What is she going to say? No, he's not coming. He's stupid. He's shiftless. He can't work. He's unruly because she doesn't want him sold. That's called appropriate adaptation to our environment. That's post-traumatic slave syndrome. But y'all are free. Y'all free. But what you have to appreciate is while Mama's sitting here, 2004, brimming over with pride, Johnny is standing there crushed. Mama, why can't you be proud? What do I have to do, Mama, for you to know that I can do things, that I'm worthy? Why can't you praise me like she praises her, Johnny? Am I not good enough? Mama, Daddy, can't you see that I can do things? I just want so much to make you proud. That's 2004, and the scary thing about it is they're brimming with pride. And we're in Johnny in 2004. It's a secret we all know that it's become a pathology that we have normalized. Now, can someone white tell us that? You got black people that walk into rooms, another form of post-traumatic slave syndrome. They walk in and they're not black. You've met them. I mentioned it earlier. Did I say that I have a lot of Latino or Hispanic in me? I have quite a bit of Indian. Right? Let me be anything but. And they come in, obviously, at least enough black that you can visually see it. And they say to the white person, no, I'm not black. This is the white therapist. They're going to say to the white therapist, but we going to now help you with your problem with your wife? I got to help you with your problem. But they can't touch that, can they? All they can do is pathologize it, but they certainly can't help. But I understand that part of us that doesn't want to be, the ones that, you know, we move on out of the race. Sometimes we'll just make money on out of the race. We figure a way out of the race. Just like that young boy I told you whose mother said, don't you bring home nothing black as you? He promptly went out and got a Mexican girl pregnant. So what she would issue forth wouldn't be what he hated and what his mother hated. But that wasn't during slavery. So when we begin to look at behaviors that we exhibit, they're not innocuous. They're harmful. One more and then I'll move on. What time is it? I don't have a sense of that. Okay. I just want... That clock is right? Let's look at this one. Here's another one. And this is a very interesting thing. I teach a course called Human Behavior in the Social Environment. And I actually teach a lot about human development. Now, there's a physiology to human development. It's something I want you to know, which is really interesting. You know, all black babies excel beyond developmentally any white babies. This is not, I'm not giving you myth here. You can look this up. Call an occupational physical therapist, developmental therapist, any of them, they'll tell you that a black child, my grandson, recently went to this little well baby thing. My daughter called me while I've been here. Because, you know, we kind of do that for each other. She's an MSW. She was in my program. And she said that when she got to the doctor's office, my grandson is 7 months old. And he said, doctor said, well, is he sitting up now? How is he doing sitting up? And my daughter said, he's pulling up and walking around furniture. Sitting up. And the woman stopped and said, well, actually, black babies are often 2 to 3 stages removed and beyond white babies, so he's probably right about where he should be. Right? You know, it's not a myth. So it makes you wonder wherein, you know, Joanna Kunjufu says 4th grade failure syndrome. Obviously, we start off ahead. So we need to take a look at that remedial father. Where are the children in proximity of that black mother or father? Yeah, they're right next to him. Matter of fact, they're so close to him, sometimes they're holding on. The mama moved, daddy moved, everybody moved together. All this, right? I actually was in line with a child, lost the mama's leg, was rubbing the leg, sucking the thumb. Mama moved, grabbed my leg, was sucking the thumb. Right? Didn't even notice, lockstep. Matter of fact, they're there, we expect them to be there, and if they should move to left, get yourself. You better get yourself. Get over there. Get over there. Right? Y'all know we all did. And I started to watch this phenomenon, and when I would ask, I literally would ask these mothers, how come the child, is right there? That's where I was. When I was with my mama, that's where you was. Don't need to be wandering about. But in the same bank, there's a white woman or a white man, and they got their little 3, 4. Johnny, honey. No, come on. Johnny, slide down the aisle. Coming up to people, what's your name? That's a pretty sweater. They're all up in your face floating all around. I'm sorry. Don't put that down. Oh, I'm sorry. You know, child all over the place, right? Same bang. It's exact same bang. So now I'm looking at this behavior because what this is called, when a child feels safe, they explore. It is how the brain develops. It's part of brain development to explore. It is one of the tasks of development to feel enough security and safety about your environment. A very important developmental stage. So now, you see, this is a nonverbal thing. So the little children can't move, but they're looking and they're learning. They're going, okay, but it's okay for him. And it's okay for her. But it's not okay for us. I can feel my mom and my daddy's fear. And now I'm afraid. I'm afraid because I'll get in trouble if I do that. Are you following me? But then children, and children are pretty resilient, they're pretty tough. So the mother or the father gets to the teller. Now they're all trying to escape because they're trying to fulfill their developmental task. So they're now underneath the little counter, which is a little higher than them, so they're underneath the counter. Mom or dad are facing the counter, and they're sliding down. They get ready, they think, oh, we're free, we're free. We're going to escape because we're going to slide out and we're going to go play. But in the line is another black mother or father. They don't know this mother, and they don't know her children. But they do know the death stare. And any black person worth their salt know the death stare. So a little kid goes, oh, wow. Not a word is exchanged. And so what we have to understand about post-traumatic slave syndrome, that it's transmitted on several levels. On the level of the individual, on the level of the family, and on the level of the community, as well as society. So this was a community-based transmission, you see. We keep the checks and balances even beyond our individual family dynamic into the community dynamic, and there is never a word exchanged. Yet Johnny is learning, 2004, that it's not safe for them to explore. We're teaching our children to be fearful. We're teaching them that they're not effective, that they're not good enough, that they're not capable, that they're not welcome. But we didn't mean to, because y'all all free, aren't you? But I'm trying to illustrate for you how it gets transmitted. And those are pretty innocuous. There's some other things that aren't so innocuous in terms of how we have learned as women to protect ourselves, right? Because we're all living in a hostile world. So I'm going to go right now to my research, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what I looked at. I looked at 200 African-American male youth, 100 of whom were actually incarcerated, and that becomes a major issue. That another form of slavery, because you better know they're going to fill all those beds that they've bought. And we are the fodder for those beds. So I worked with 100 that were incarcerated, 100 that were not. So 200 in all. So now to empirically measure injury. I want to measure, I want to be able to create predictability as it relates to violence. I wanted to look at vacant esteem, and now you have a sense of what vacant esteem is. Vacant esteem is also what the whole notion of don't you bring home nothing black is you, good hair, bad hair, all of that falls in the category of vacant esteem. And so part of what I wanted to look at was that notion of self and self-efficacy. But my committee said that's not a social problem. They said that's not a social problem, but you can look at violence. We consider that a social problem. We don't care how y'all feel. We just want you to not bother us. So I looked at violence. And one of the things I wanted to do in this study was look at how do we predict violence in African-American male youth. So what I did was I looked at 5 variables, 5 scales or measurements, 5 surveys, if you will, right? And the 5 surveys, we're going to ask the question, what is the relationship to this variable and the use of violence? So that's the dependent variable. What I want to find out is use of violence. So the first 2 variables that I use, you are familiar with. It's all through the literature. You've read about it and heard about it, and it's specials all on television and everything. And that is violence victimization. We know that if there is victimization, there's likelihood that that person is going to grow up to be what? Violent, because they've been victimized. So that's called a baseline variable, something we know. Then we have violence witnessing. We also know that the more witnessing you have of violence, the more likelihood you're going to have violence. So those are two baselines. The next three were cultural or socio-cultural variables. These were the variables I wanted to connect with culture, with history, and with injury. So the first variable that comes out is a variable called urban hassles. My hypothesis was the more urban hassles, the more violence. And I surveyed all 200 of these young men to find out, well, what is an urban hassle? Do you hear sirens at night? Do you hear gunshots? Do people approach you trying to sell you drugs? Do you try to find a safer route home from school sometimes? Are you fearful of the safety of yourself or your family? Those are called urban hassles. And I said the more of them, the more violence. Now, we understand what created the urban setting, right? You understand that that was something deliberate. Urban ghettos and all that sort of thing. It's deliberate. And within those are the urban hassles that go along with it, yet unmeasured for us, because we've normalized it, right? Do you see what I'm saying? This becomes normal behavior. We've normalized the stressors associated with being black. I want the day to come when they put electrodes on a brother when a police car rides up behind him. Because, you know, when a police car rides up behind my husband, I know that that police car is there without my husband ever saying a word. His entire body language changes. We haven't done anything wrong, yet there is a hypersensitivity. There's a look in the rear view. There's a checking to make certain everybody's in their seatbelt. This is 2004. Nobody's measured the electrodes that go into the stressors associated with being black. Okay, that's when we don't measure. You know, there's a stress scale where they measure, you know, if you get married, you get divorced, if you move, if you know, somebody dies, somebody born. How about if you're black? There's a stressor associated with being black. Nobody's ever measured that. Okay, so now when you begin to look at this urban hassle, I said it predicted. Now here's the next one. Now this variable is an important one. It's called racial socialization. All this, it can be found in a published dissertation, but the racial socialization scale, both of these scales, by the way, written by black people, this racial socialization scale is actually a protective factor. We're saying that this is going to build resilience. Now, what is racial socialization? Racial socialization implies and suggests that we should prepare our children that they may be in a hostile environment. But even if they enter that hostile environment, they're going to be okay. And the reason they're going to be okay is because they got a God. And the reason why they're going to be okay is because they have a rich, strong culture. And if for some reason mama can't help you, grandma, auntie, or uncle can. They learn that you are not the descendant of slaves, but you are the descendant of captured free men. You learn that you have self-efficacy in and of yourself, that you have intrinsic value, power all by yourself. And I suggested that the more racial socialization, the less violence. Now the fourth, or the variable, that I looked at, I searched for, I waited for, because this was going to be the linchpin, and I knew it. And they kept telling me about this scale and mom and daddy scale and who in the house scale and socioeconomic. And I said, no, that's not what this scale's got to be about. But it's interesting how things come to you, because I knew that it would have to come from these young men. And so I would meet with them and kept hearing this over and over again. Well, you know, they diss me. You know, that's what happens when you diss a brother. Well, the reason why that brother went down like that is because he was dissed. Meaning what? Disrespected. And I heard it, both groups, all 200. It would happen so much, I said, okay, I've got to look at the relationship of respect to violence. So I immediately went back to my committee and I said, I need to find a respect scale. And I searched the literature and there wasn't one. And so my committee said, oh, it seems you have a problem. I said, but I must write one then. Well, they say, you're not, I'm not one of those people that create scales. I have no skill in that. It's never been tested. It's never been measured. It's never been, none of that. So but they couldn't argue because one didn't exist. So I wrote the scale, and they didn't know if it was going to perform, meaning that it was valid. They didn't know it had face validity, but they weren't certain. But I looked at respect in these categories: respect among peers, respect among institutions, and respect among authority and society. I wanted to know what these young men felt about, and my hypothesis was the degree to which they felt respected, they would have less violence, and the degree to which they felt disrespected, conversely, would produce violence. So I did a linear regression analysis, meaning I took all of those variables and I looked at them as it related to significant prediction of use of violence. And all of the hypothesis was correct. Well, great, that was wonderful. Now we know that more relation and witnessing produces violence, more urban hassles produces violence, more racial socialization decreases violence, less respect, more violence, more respect, less violence. So it became very clear, great. But then I wanted to know from these young men 2 open-ended questions. So now we're not looking at a scale. I'm letting them write it out themselves, all 200 of them. If for some reason you or your friends have been disrespected, why do you think it happened? And why do you think people like you might be disrespected? I asked them this in 2000. I asked them this in 2000. I wanted to know, what do you think about that? And so they gave me answers. But before they gave me answers, I did a stepwise multiple regression analysis, and I wanted to look at what are the very strongest predictors of violence in this study, Joy. Of all the variables, what are the strongest? And what fell out first was victimization and witnessing, baseline variables we already knew, and respect. Strongest predictor of violence. I'm going, oh my God. And what is the criminal justice system based on? What is its motto? It's punitive. I'm going to take you. So in effect, it is a wrong approach to rehabilitation because you are creating a criminal. Because the more you disrespect him and crush him, the more violent he will become. So now I go back to why, though, do you think in 2000, in 2001, and let me help you understand who the other 100 young men were, the ones that were not incarcerated. They were in a Gentleman's Rites of Passage program, Afrocentric program called Bridge Builders, where they went into Passage at 14 and they graduated from Passage after completing 1 year of college. They were going to Stanford, they were going to Harvard, they were going to black colleges, they were going all over the country. Same kids, same zip code area. Only difference was they went through this program of Passage. So surely they would have a different perspective on this. Surely they would be different in their belief system around why they were disrespected, and guess what they said? The large majority of them said, it is because I am black. I am a black man living in a white man's world, because historically we have never been respected. Post-traumatic slave syndrome, you will always be black. So how long do our black men think they're going to be disrespected? And you know they're mad about it. They're mad about it. So it became very, very clear that this wasn't any isolated incident. They knew why they were disrespected. And they knew that it was perpetual. And what does it look like? What kind of future do you have when you know you are always going to be marginalized? No matter what degree you get, no matter how much money you have. Like Stevie said, you can't, trade in your face. You can't. And one of the things that I started to realize, I said, my God, that wasn't the deep about this research, because it became very clear. Now all of the prisons, everybody's calling me, writing, because now they know it's out. I need to replicate the study. We need more research. It's not enough research. I need to look at women and girls and our relationship between men and women. I need to look at all of that. And I can't do it all. But now the cat's out. Now we know. And we know creating criminals, and you're doing it deliberately. We know it. They're not functional outside of prisons now. They're not functional. They're learning dysfunction and deviance. It's designed that way. And it is counterindicated for them to be treated with a punitive model. Clearly, it's wrong. But what was more important to me, what was far more important to me, was what I learned respect meant. That is what, to me, was the crucible in this research. Something it's called unexpected results. By the way, I discovered that they always talk about the absence of father and what it produces in young delinquent males? My research suggested that it was the absence of mother, not the absence of father. Now, you've heard a lot of stuff, but the absence of mother, whether she was physically there or not, present, or whether she was not there, it produced more violence than the absence of father. So we need to start taking a look at that. But aside from that, here's what I realized. Can anybody out there tell me what respect means? I mean, you know, because I asked white people what respect means. You know, and white people, particularly white men, it was very interesting, their response. And their response was thoughtful. And they said, I think for me, respect means an earned regard. Earned regard. I asked black men and women what respect means to them. They say, a sense of value and worth. Respect. To be treated with a sense of dignity, value, and worth. I asked my husband when my grandson was born, I said, does Nasir have worth? And he says, of course he has worth. I said, what is his worth? He said, hope. He is the proof. He is a continuation. He is a future. He has intrinsic worth. But what was interesting is that respect doesn't mean that. Respect doesn't either of those things. Respect, taken from the Latin, literally, means look again. Respect, look again. What did they say to me in Africa? I see you. Look again. Don't look the first time. Don't trust what you see the first time. Give me a chance and look again, because then you'll see what's in you is in me. Look again. So not only must they look again, we must look again. We must respect. It is simple, and it took me all the way back to the home. We've got to respect who we are. We cannot do that if we don't who we are. We cannot correct what we don't understand. And we cannot apologize for having the courage to talk about what hurts us. We have never been given permission, nor have we given ourselves permission to talk about our injury. Post-traumatic slave syndrome is not something odd. Naeem Akbar talked about it. James P. Comer talked about it. Asa Hilliard talked about it. Wade Nobles talked about it. Your grandmama talked about it. Your grandfather talked about it. Your sister talks about it. We just put a name to it. But it's things that go off. We've got to stop injuring ourselves, and we have to start looking more closely at that injury, something we have never given ourselves permission to do. We have a Holocaust that we have never honored. And I'm telling you, when I say everything in the dark is coming to the light, I'm telling you, our ancestors unearthed themselves here in New York. They unearthed themselves. They said, you will have to honor me. There's no choice. Everything is getting uncovered. And it's not an easy thing. This is a painful process. Nor am I looking for the permission of white people to talk about it. I'm not. I'm not asking them. To do so is to engage in post-traumatic slave syndrome. To do so, to say, Mr. Jimmy, you know, I'm cut over here. I'm cut over here. I want to show it to you. It hurts and I'm bleeding. Mr. Jimmy, does it hurt? And we will ask Mr. Jimmy, and if he says it doesn't, we go, well, if Mr. Jimmy said it don't hurt, it must not hurt. I'm not getting ready to ask anybody about my injury. I'm not getting ready to ask anyone to validate, accept, or approve of that. But I understand we need to look at this thing systematically and in the right way. In every way. We need our own truth and reconciliation. Are you with me? We need to be able to speak our injury. We need to be able to do that cathartic step. And then we need to move on to the next step, which is healing. Folks have asked me, what do I hope for? I hope for truth and reconciliation. I hope for our economic self-sufficiency. I hope for the stability of our families. I hope for the joy and happiness of our children. I hope that we will forever be contributors to an ever-advancing civilization, because we are the mothers and fathers of civilization. And so it is that time for us. So I want to close with a wonderful statement that I often read, because it is so powerful. I said to myself when my grandson was born, I had the opportunity to be at that birth. And I thought before my grandson was born that I could retire. And when I looked at him and I gazed into his eyes, all the rest of the world became ashes. Became ashes. And I said, I have to do it for him and for little Naya, my granddaughter. I have to do it for them. Because if we do it, it's going to get done. If we don't do it, it won't be done. And we will continue to be injured and to wonder what's wrong. We know what's wrong, friends. We have to begin to address it. Among the most accomplished and fabled tribes of Africa, no tribe was considered to have warriors more fearsome or more intelligent than the mighty Maasai. It is perhaps surprising then to learn the traditional greeting that passed between Maasai warriors. Kasarian and Gera, one would always say to another, meaning, and how are the children? It is still the traditional greeting among the Maasai, acknowledging the high value that they place on their children's well-being. Even warriors with no children of their own would always give the traditional answer, all the children are well. Yes, all the children are well. Meaning, of course, that peace and safety prevail, that the priorities of protecting the young, the powerless are in place, that Maasai society has not forgotten its reason for being, its proper functions and responsibility. All the children are well means that life is good. It means that the daily struggles of existence, even among a poor people, do not preclude their proper care for their young. I wonder how it might affect our consciousness of our own children's welfare if in our culture we took to greeting each other with this same daily question. And how are the children? I wonder if we heard that question and passed it along to each other a dozen times a day, if it would begin to make a difference in the reality of how children are thought of or cared for in this country. I wonder if every adult among us, parent and non-parent alike, felt an equal weight for the daily care and protection of the children. I wonder if we could say without any hesitation, the children are well. Yes, all the children are well. Our children are not well. They are not. And I strongly believe that they can be healed. They can be prevented from carrying all of the baggage, all of the injuries that I have, the injuries that I carried that my mother had and my father had and your mother and father had. I believe that if we really stand together, if we exemplify the things we know to be true and real, the things that Dr. King gave his life for, I think we can be certain that we can say, all the children are well. Dear friends, let the healing begin. Thank you.
Let us thank God again for Dr. Leary. This is so profound. And it's just been beautiful to see all of you be so attentive today and to listen. But she's excellent. She knows how to throw in scholarship. She knows how to use humor. She knows how to use the experiences for motherhood. She knows how to do it all. She's just a bad black woman. And it's with that kind of love that we want to express to her today. And we want to thank you so much, Dr. Leary, on behalf of Dr. Butts, who is traveling, speaking on King Day. We thank you so much for traveling all the way from Portland to come to New York. We wish that we could keep you here in New York, but if Portland is, as you said, you may need to be out there to get them straight, too. But her tapes are here and CDs are here. They will be in the bookstore of the church. You can go down to the lobby area and purchase tapes, CDs of Dr. Leary after this service. And now we're going to entertain a few questions. There are 2 microphones that are here. Please go to the microphone. We may not be able to get to all of the questions, but we will try to get to as many as possible. So if you will go to the microphones, and we will let Dr. Leary answer those questions. And, wow, I know it's going to be a lot of questions, so we'll get to as many as we can. And as you come forward, if you will state your question, state your name and state your question. Comments, you know, we have just thanked her, but we want to hear your question so that we can make sure that she can answer them.
Thanks. Good afternoon, Dr. Leary. I'm Christine Melton Jordan. I just want to ask you, I've been very negative on shows like Roots and the various different slave shows that come out year after year, the Sally Hemings and so forth, because I feel like in all of those things, besides the Haile Gerima movie, that slavery, even though we're learning our history, there's always an aspect of it that romanticizes slavery. So when people say, oh, this historical thing's going to be on, make sure you look at it, make sure you have your children look at it. I'm so negative on Roots because it romanticizes the slave master raping the children. What should we do to teach our children all of our history and not have them, because I think they feel subservient after they watch Roots, because that slave master raped us and it looked romantic in some form. What can we do about that?
You know, I think that as a parent, I have children, and I think it is the first level of education needs to happen at home. When the brother talked about racial socialization, he's talking about giving that accurate picture. Of course, obviously, we need our own schools. We need schools that are talking about the true history, and we need to read. We need to read, we need to share with our children, and we need to do that anyhow, because there are a whole lot of things far worse than those historical issues around black people. I'm more concerned about all of the obsession with wealth and the fact that people will demean themselves and eat dirt and foul things and all this for $1 million. It bothers me that their depiction of black people and other. I'm not that worried about Roots and that sort of thing. But I think if children are centered and have a sense of who they are, then they have something to buttress the lies and the ignorance. We can't get angry if we're not doing our part. And the problem is schools aren't doing it, then we need to do it. We need to do it in the communities, in churches like this one. There's no reason why that education should not be taking place so that our children can intelligently decipher the nonsense. And the problem is they don't have anything to weigh it against. I mean, that's my answer. And we are getting more black producers and more black writers that are getting a little more freedom. But you know what runs the media industry? You know who runs it? So what we got to appreciate is, you know, I got to respect those brothers and sisters that are willing to get out there and stand out there, albeit not exactly what we want, but we got to provide the other balance on the other side. That's what I think.
Hello, my name is Laree Daniel, and I'm the chair of the Black Law Student Society at NYU, at the law school there. And 2 questions. 1, we would love to have you come and be a featured speaker for February of this month. So how can we get in touch with you? And 2, where is your information? Where is your art?
There are 2 websites you can look at. One is called oneness.org. I think I got that right. Is that right? Thank you. And the other is posttraumatic slave syndrome.org. all one word, posttraumaticslavesyndrome.com. There you can get information about how to get the scale. You can get information about the model, the educational model I wrote, and the dissertation. And also there's some, I have some information published in a book called Should America Pay? By Ray Winbush, that's out at Barnes and Nobles. You can find that book, and there's some information on post-traumatic slave syndrome. I'm also published in journals. They're pretty thick and boring, but if you want to go that route, there is some literature that I have published there too.
Okay.
Hi there. My name is Yusef Salam. I'm an educator and writer, and you mentioned some things like castration and so on, and the behavior of Caucasians or whites toward blacks. Do you agree with Dr. Cress Welson's theory that some of this is genetic, is sort of a feel of genetic inferiority toward blacks? They don't want to lose their ethnicity because they fear blacks and things like that.
I think, for certain, I don't know enough about genetics to make a call on that. I do know that there's a whole lot more that's being looked at in terms of DNA and that's being looked at in terms of melanin and just basic neurophysiology. I know for a fact that, for example, if you begin to look at behavior around stress and trauma, particularly in young children, it actually impacts the brain. If children experience trauma early on, from say 0 to 5, it actually impacts the neurotransmitters in the brain. You're looking at a release of the chemical cortisol, which is a chemical that kind of institutes the notion of fight or flight. Okay, so what I want you to stay with me. It's a long way of answering the question. But what we do know that if a child is consistently subjected to trauma and stressors, now if you're black, you know that's an inordinate amount. And if those children have that, they produce an excess of cortisol, which is why you may find this experience. You walk up to a child, maybe he's in a school, maybe he's at home. Derek, could you pick up your books there? Why are you always on me? Why I got to pick up the books? You don't ever say anything to Cynthia about it. I'm sick of this. Dang, all of a sudden it's escalating. What's been tripped is cortisol, fight or flight. Now, there's not a fight or flight, but it's perceived that way. So now, the more you confront, the higher it escalates. There are modalities. The absolute opposite is what happened. Stop. Derek, you think I'm attacking you? I'm not attacking you, Derek. I'm lowering my voice. I'm slowing the pace. Because when a person is in fight or flight, they don't have access to reason. And what that means, if you want to know it on a very physical level, if, for example, I'm right now, and that microphone represents a semi-truck. And I'm outside, and a semi-truck flips over and is moving towards me. What happens in my body is my body shuts down my access to reason completely. My brain wants every ounce of energy to move me from that spot. It does not want me to go, God, there appears to be a semi coming my way. Now, I wonder if I should move. No. What happens is I find myself on the other side of the street. Someone goes, Joy, what happened? I go, I don't know. The first thing I knew, I was looking at it, and then I don't even remember how I got there. Why? Because it closed my access to reason. So when a child is in fight or flight and we're saying, listen, are you listening to me? Why are you yelling? You're talking to someone that can't access reason. They feel like they're being threatened. Well, that not only do they begin to trigger it because it becomes addictive. So they create crisis so they can trigger it. Do you see what I'm saying? And this is another thing that's happening a lot with our children. And they're being labeled ADHD and ADD and every other D there is because they don't understand what happens to children with stressors. So there is a real impact on the brain. How that factors in genetically along with social learning, I'm not certain. But it's certainly worthy of investigation and research.
Hello, Doctor. I would just like to purchase a copy of your thesis on post-traumatic slave syndrome and also your dissertation on the African-American male.
The respect scale is actually is a separate instrument. However, there's a way. One is you can get the dissertation through Portland Public Schools, through Portland State University. That may be a harder route. Go through the website. They'll direct you, and so there's a way of getting it that way. There's another way to go straight through the university. It's a little lengthy, though, because there's a whole issue, because it's pretty thick. The dissertation's pretty thick, like 140-something. I don't know how long it is anymore. But, yeah, you can. What did you say the website was? Portland State University, and the website is oneness,
Okay.
.org, or
How do you spell O-N?
ONENESS.org, or posttraumaticslavesyndrome.com.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Francine Jones, and I really enjoyed your presentation. And my question is, a couple of months ago, I saw on one of the news channels Condoleezza Rice, who was presenting the president's new plan to deal with Africa, and she said that they were doing this because slavery was a defect in history, and the way he's relating to Africa now is trying to remedy that, and I want to know how you analyze that.
Well, you know, here everything is driven. The economy drives everything. Now, we also know, and one of the things that constantly gets, probably in the line is someone that wants to talk about reparations, there is this parallel process. You have reparations on the one hand that deals with a repair of that injustice, which happens on a variety of levels, economically, socially, spiritually, a variety of different ways that we need to repair. You have that. That's a discussion that's out there. You know, my father used to always say, linger long, but die you must. There's only so long that they can avoid that. So the other piece is, you know, Bush went to the slave castles and he saw what was there, and he made the big mistake because the UN has declared this a crime against humanity, what happened. And so he said, verbally, he said it, and they quoted him, this was a crime against humanity. The President of the United States said that. And when he did that, that was admission. So there's a lot of politics and a lot tied up in that's making it politically correct for them to begin to look at that repair. And they're trying to do that with the least amount of injury to their economy as possible. So please understand it. Yeah, you're going to hear a lot more about that.
Thank
you. Good afternoon. My name is Tessa Spidalis, and before coming to this country, I wasn't black. Now I'm here and I'm trying to really assimilate what it means to be black. I'm involved in early childhood care, and I want to know how could I really implement racial socialization for them so that they could really appreciate themselves as a black American child.
I think that, first of all, there are a number of models. I would never suggest that there's only one way. There's a number of ways. And I think we socialize the children by telling them the truth. And we tell them based on their capacity to hear things. My children, for example, while the school did exist, we had something called the Black Educational Center, which was the only black private school that I know of in the country of its kind. It was totally Afrocentric, and it basically, these children graduated from Joseph Kincaid and Malcolm X. These were the rooms. They learned about their history, and up until my son was about, and my daughter was about, 10 or 12, they thought it was just, they felt sorry for white people. No, they did. They did. They said, God, it's just so sad that they don't have the rich culture that we have, you know. And that's an interesting notion, because here's what happens when we ask. There's a book called Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? And that book really addresses the difference of what happens to our children versus theirs. And when you ask a black child, or even a Latino child, or a native child, you say to them, tell us a little bit about your cultural background. African-American children will say, well, I know that, you know, my ancestors came from Africa, and each one of them will talk about it. When they come to white children, they get stumped. And one little girl said, I guess I'm just normal. Which means everybody else is what? Abnormal. So the sense of culture was not there. It was not present. What we need to do is give our children that sense of who they are, strong enough, because you don't have to worry about them getting the other half. If they go in the public school system, which if it doesn't destroy or injure them, it certainly is going to destroy their sense of self. We have to instill that. I've written a model. I didn't share much about the model here, but it's called the relationship model. And it has been found to be, of course it was tested, found to be effective by Northwest Regional Educational Laboratories that dealt with how you should deal with our children, how we should deal with our children. There are other models out there as well, and I would suggest that one of the problems we have as a black community is the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. And that's why I am proposing a clearinghouse so we don't have to all reinvent the wheel over and over again. There are programs out there. I'd be happy to share that with you. And also on the website is a bibliography of some books that I think would be helpful.
Thank you.
Peace. My respect to you, sister, freedom fighter. I'd like to come with this question. Could you speak briefly to me or to us about the idea of the post-traumatic slavery syndrome effect upon us in the denial of honoring our freedom fighters and political prisoners who died and are being tortured today. But we, the very same people who deny their validity and even existence, pay homage to Patrick Henry and George Washington.
You know, post-traumatic slave syndrome takes on a lot of different areas. And when you start looking at the overseer mentality, when people don't want to seem like they're aligning themselves. I actually had a brother say recently in my community, which is kind of scary, that one of the problems he had with me and other people in the community is that I was too black. You know, he knew how to talk to white people, and it was, we just needed to learn how to be not so black, right? And some people believe that that's how you survive. You survive by being less black. And so that's part of what we've done, and is part of the reason why I think, and I'll say this, and I mean it seriously, that the first sign of spiritual development and maturity is to be able to delight in the success of your neighbor. And we don't delight in one another's success. We are threatened by it. And so what you're looking at there is that mentality of survival, learning how to survive in a hostile environment. Some of us are saying, well, I'm willing to take the risk to be real, to tell the truth, to honor what is true. And others say, well, I don't want Miss Ann to think that I'm too black, because I want to be able to get that job and keep that job, okay? And I'm not trying to belittle black people, because we're trying to survive, okay? And I know that. And while we can talk tough, we got to pay the bills, okay? I got drama jumping off now. I tell you, black people, if white people have a cold, black people have pneumonia. It's the truth. My car was stolen since I've been here. Okay, so, the drama's always happening, and we are always having to deal with this, and yes, I'm Joy, and I'm the professor, hey, but I got to go home and deal with drama, right? And I got to go to work, and I got to deal with people that don't like me, and I got to, all of that. I'm dealing with in a den of folks that don't necessarily respect what I'm doing and who I am, and I have to also survive. So I don't want us to be too judgmental, because we've all had to do a lot of things we don't want to do to be able to just subsist, okay? So with that said, yeah, there has to be a balance there, and yeah, we must honor them always, but also understand that we're the walking wounded.
Good evening. My name is Stephen Jones. My question, I guess, resolves around, you made a point that when you went to Africa, you felt a connection. Can you speak towards the loss of connection when Africans come to America?
Absolutely. One of the things that happened, I did some work at Harlem Hospital recently with the chief psychiatrist there and his interns. And he wanted me to come and talk to them about post-traumatic slave syndrome. And when I walked in the room, seated all around this huge table were all these black people, and I was just thrilled to death. Not one of them was African American. Not one of them. All of them were African. And what was happening to them, because you got to appreciate this. They come into a country where just do the math. You figure out who's on the bottom, who's not respected, who it doesn't seem viable, all of that. And you're saying, I don't know how much I want to align myself, and what's wrong with y'all, by the way? Okay? And so what happens to them is they're trying to figure out what's going on. They don't understand. And when I explained to them what was happening, what black people have had to do to adapt to being in a hostile environment, all of a sudden their faces changed. I'm glad you said that, because I didn't understand why this woman said this and why she did this. And I didn't understand, because there's a disconnect, and most likely you're not going to align yourself with the folks that you think are getting ready to get kicked to the curb, okay? So, and I'm not saying, and that's not true of all Africans, but there's a fair number of folks that come in and they don't carry the same baggage, while at the same time, now I was on a radio show and folks were trying to say to me, well, the folks from the Caribbean don't have the same experience. I was at the keynote at the UN Conference on Race in Barbados. And when I was there, they had Africans throughout the diaspora there. They were translating in booths in different languages. People were crying to me in every language in the world, saying to me, I understand this discussion you're having on post-traumatic slave syndrome. Let me tell you what that looked like in Brazil. Let me tell you what that looked like in Barbados. Let me tell you what that looked like. So it's there. And that injury, if you have, and I believe that it requires those folks to have that conversation because they too are injured.
Greetings. My name is Ron Wright. I'm a New Yorker. Thank you for coming. Hope you come again. Based on what the Japanese have done, based on what the Jews and the Native Americans, what they have done, on your studies, do you feel, with respect to the elders who are in political arenas and religious arenas that are doing things, do you feel that is ignorant to just focus on reparations and not sovereignty?
Reparations and not sovereignty?
Yeah.
Explain what you mean by sovereignty.
Well, the people who asked for reparations, the Japanese, the Jews, and even Hawaiians, Native Americans, they all had a land base. So that's what made everything easier for reparations to flow. Nubian or brown people in America don't have basically a section of land base that they could actually say that it's scattered around. They do, once they link themselves to certain tribes and things like that. But there are people like Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson and other people who ask just for reparations and have no land base. Based on your studies of post-traumatic slavery, how do you feel about this?
I think that, and my husband and I were talking about this recently, and the whole idea of ownership. And part of what, I don't know if there's something, a psychic problem within African American peoples that make us feel like we can't own things. Maybe it's because we've been owned. But we tend to not realize the need to own things. And principally land, we need to own it. And I'm going to say it one more time, we need to own Harlem. And we have enough black wealth to own Harlem. That's absolutely ridiculous what's happening in Harlem. Yes, in fact, we do need to have that. Yeah, I don't know, we'll probably won't get the 40 acres and a mule, but the point is that you're absolutely right. We do need to have those things. I don't know that the answer lies in any one thing. Let me say this too, and I think this is very important. The African American community's voice can no longer have the capacity to be stilled by a single shot. We can't afford that. We don't need a leader. We need leadership. We need our children to be leaders. We need it to be so pervasive and so spread out across this country that they can't find a target. Okay? And the bottom line is that that's what's required. A collective work and responsibility. What you know about those groups is the ability to come together. We still don't trust each other. I swear to God, I've never seen, you talk about crabs in the barrel. We are unable to trust. If I go to a job, right now, I go to a job interview and there's another sister there going for the job and there's a white person going for the job, she's going to feel better if the white person gets it. She'll go, okay, good, great. But she's going to question why I got it. Okay? And this is part of our pathology around being able to assist each other. So that's part of the issue of owning and land and sovereignty and all that. We got to be able to come together, which we haven't gotten there yet.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I was the lady in the back who said, you got all the time in the world. My name is Michelle Heath. I'm the author of 7 Principles to Become Your Own Superhero. I used to be over 200 pounds, and in that process of trying to lose weight and change my life and not be so beat down and run over and pull up my self-esteem, etc. I'm telling you, I used to get arrows thrown at me left and right. You losing more weight? You don't look that good. Over and over and over and over and over. I mean, these were women who were as big as couches. I mean, they just did not care. Now, my question is this. Today, at this, point in my life, I really don't want to share like how I did. I just say, go to my book, read my book, because I'm worn out. How do you not get worn out? Because I'm a warrior, but I'm worn out because today at BAM, Brooklyn Academy of Music, I'm using the bathroom, I take off my jacket, this woman says, oh my God, I love your muscles. I said, well, I worked really hard, blah, 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 blah. Then she goes, well, did you become anorexic first? I mean, I get all kinds of stuff thrown at me. How do I stay focused? How do I have faith in my people? Because I want my people to, come up and do whatever. But I'm telling you, sometimes it is so tough. I'm like, you know what? Read my book.
I think that all of us all of us are in the trenches, you know, and on different levels. Like I said, you know, I always try to think about whose shoulders I stand on. And I thank God Harriet didn't get too tired, you know. And I think it takes a great effort. And I think a lot of it is a psychic injury. I know we do need to take care of ourselves, and I want us to learn how to embrace and love each other and be patient with each other, and to understand how, I want to say this because it's very important, what we do to each other with words.
Yes.
You see, we have, and I want to say just very quickly about men and women in particular, we're both in the rifle sights all the time. And I am in the book. I've actually written a book. I'm at this point shopping and looking at getting it published. But the book speaks to these kinds of things. And one of them is to see how we have exacerbated each other. What we've done to survive. And there's nothing like a black woman's tongue. It is how we've learned to fight. It is our weapon. Vent. So who are you going to vent at? That's a safe place for me to vent. And she's going, oh no, I don't think so. That's not going to happen. And then we lacerate him. And the very thing that we use to lacerate each other with, his dominance and her aggression, is the antithesis of what either of us can take. And so what we do is we destroy each other in an act of trying to survive. And we have to be very, very careful, because as tough as we are with lacerating, we can't take it. Okay, I'm going to tell you the truth. We can't take it. And so it's something that we have to learn in terms of how to talk to each other, how to be loving and to be patient with people. You know, folks got issues. Anybody here undefeated? Okay, then ain't nobody here made it nowhere. I know I can't say I'm undefeated. So I think we're pretty hard on each other. And we got to learn to give some room, because we are really fragile people. Okay, so you need to take care of you, and at the same time, you have to be forgiving, and you have to understand that our ancestors and everyone, I want you to imagine, not even Harriet, I want you to imagine the slave at year 150, okay, and what they believed, okay? So we've got, you know, I know we have a right to be tired, but I can't complain too much, I don't think. So I'm saying that, yeah, it's going to take more, and unfortunately, that's what it's called for. All of us going to be tired, but it'd be nice if we have more folks working. That'd be nice.
Thank you.
First.
Okay, we're going to end at 4:30. And someone asked me how much the tapes were. They're $10. There's a one-sided CD with post-traumatic slave syndrome. Okay.
First of all, thank you very much for your lecture. My name is Lori Jones. My question is, when you talked about the mother preparing the child and you mentioned the father not being helpless, I had heard a doctor that talked about the fact that male-female, black male-female relationships may have a separation based on the fact, post-traumatic slave syndrome, where the male and the female had to learn to distance themselves from each other.
Of course, yeah.
Because they had to make sure that they didn't show affection, because they could use that against each other in terms of punishment, or they could sell them at a moment's notice. Do you feel that acknowledgement of the fact that this exists is enough to repair the relationship, or if something specifically needs to be done?
Oh, no, it's not enough. It's not enough. Telling people about it is the first level. It's giving people permission to take a look at it. It's raising awareness. And often I was talking to Onaje, and I want to acknowledge the people in the room that really have been here. Onaje and his wife, Nyamo. I got it right. Nyamo. I get names crazy. And Gil Noble, I know, is here. I don't know if Adelaide Sanford made it. My elder and my dear friend and mentor. I don't know. I know Carol was here earlier, but these are the folks that, you know, when I look at talking about what it's going to take, one of the first levels is cathartic. It really is. It's really being able, because if you find out, you know why we always have to tell black people when they get to the mic, please ask the question? You know why we got to tell them that? How many times do you get a chance to get to the mic? You see? And you want to tell your story. You want to be able to say what it felt like. I know that about black people, and I know we don't have all the time in the world, but we've got to understand that the first part of that is awareness. The other is really developing treatment modalities that are culturally appropriate and specific.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Sam Salim. I really enjoyed your lecture. In your lecture, you talked about violence and how that related to respect. And the more respect you have, the less violent you tend to be. The question that I have for you is, for us as a people, if we stopped identifying with the N-word, do you think that would contribute to less violence amongst our people?
Probably among some of us. I think that we have to know what has gone on. Like, for example, sir, I don't know how old you are. Would you mind telling me how old you are right now?
I'm 59.
You're 59 years old. Do you recall a time when it was inappropriate to call a black man a boy?
Yes.
Okay, now I don't care who it was. I know you didn't call my daddy a boy. You didn't do it under any circumstances. It was visceral. It could cause you to lose your life, calling my daddy a boy. And that had to do with the disrespect. Now, everybody says, yeah, I'm with my boys. You know, get your boys. Oh, those are my boys. That's my boy. Do you see what I'm saying? So we're looking at it as a generational thing. The N-word, in my perspective, it's not a good thing. Okay. But I also know it as a colloquialism among black youth, hip-hop, a variety of people, they interpret it a lot of ways. I'm looking at the hip-hop generation, which we need to get with. And we need to get with them. And I don't mean in a harsh way, because, you know, they're surviving. And because of our lack of giving them tools, they figured out their own. And it's a bit aberrant. But they're doing that in face of, you know what? I'm going to make it one way or another. I'm going to get mine. And that's because somewhere along the way, we did not give them the armor to deal with that. Thus, the N-word has become one of those, it's almost a defiance. And it serves to both unite and also alienate, all at the same time. And that is just a reflection of our lack of contact and interaction with a group of folks that say, you know, you ain't helping me survive. I'm going to make sure I figure it out.
May I see you after the show?
Sure. I'm going to be around.
Okay.
Okay, I have.
Yes. Good evening. I thank you for your lecture. I've been looking forward to meeting you. I heard you on the radio. But anyway, my name is Helen Burrell. I'm from New York City. My title really doesn't matter at this point. But my question is that they use the rationale about blacks selling slaves from Africa and whites selling slaves from Africa. And how do you answer that question? Because somebody's trying to psych somebody out here.
Well, you know, the thing is that it's also, I'm going to answer that in a really kind of unique way. You all remember the Million Man March. I remember because of my birthday, October 16th. And one of the things that I noticed, and I was so touched, I was so moved just watching the television. I was just so, I can't just tell you what happened to me physically. It just was wonderful. You know, I didn't care if they were going there to shoot marbles. It didn't matter to me. But before it could even be over, they found black people to berate it. You know, they gave them prime time to dog it out. Always. So you're going to know there's always going to be this diversionary tactics to say this or that. You know, one of the things we have to note, too, that has to be on the agenda, and that is dealing with Africa. Africa was a part of this injury. And I know in Ghana they're trying to do some things, there are brothers and sisters that are going back and forth, and they're saying, you know, we're sorry for what we did. We didn't know. We couldn't know. But whatever the case, we need to own it. That's part of what the issue is. So it's not a matter of us saying it didn't happen. I don't care whether it happened. That's pointless to me. So what? That does not excuse what you did. Okay? And so we can't get distracted by that sort of thing. It's just a diversionary thing that, you know, folks say.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Uh-huh.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Leary. We have come to the end of this program. Will you be downstairs?
Yeah, I'll be downstairs.
Okay. She'll be downstairs in the bookstore. For those who did not have a chance to ask that question, you can ask her. We're going to close with a prayer, so don't leave yet. Don't leave yet. You know, we still in the church. We got to have the benediction, the final blessing. But she will be down in the bookstore to answer questions and also to talk with those there, maybe even to do, you're going to sign CDs? If you want her to sign your CD, she can do that as well. But we do want to acknowledge our brother Gil Noble, who is here. It's always good to see him. And so we're going to ask now that everybody stand, and if you'll grab the hand of your neighbor as we close in prayer, The next event for the Board of Christian Social Concerns will be that Black Family Tech Week. It will be Thursday, February 19, 2004, 6 o'clock p.m. Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you now for this day and for all your many blessings. We thank you, O God, for our sister, Dr. Leary, and for how you have used her today. And God, we thank you for the spirit of Dr. King, which continues to move throughout this nation. Help us, O God, as we continue to move toward healing and wholeness. And we pray, O God, that the lecture that we heard today from Dr. Leary will move us closer to that day when we can say, as Dr. King said, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. In your name we pray, amen.